The barn was already burning when Mara ran inside. Flames roared against the midnight sky, while terrified screams echoed from the stable. Everyone watched from the hills, frozen in horror. The woman they called too old, too plain, too worthless to matter, she disappeared into that inferno without hesitation. This is the story of how the frontier woman nobody wanted became the one person an entire valley couldn't survive without. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wagon lurched to a stop outside the Mercer ranch just as the February sun bled across the frozen Wyoming hills. Mara Quinn gripped the wooden seat, her fingers numb beneath worn gloves, and studied the property through eyes that had learned long ago not to expect much. The house sagged. That was her first thought. Not collapsed, not abandoned, but sagging, like something alive that had given up halfway through the fight. Fence posts leaned at crooked angles. The barn door hung from a single hinge. Snow had drifted against the porch steps, and nobody had bothered to clear it. "This is it?" The wagon driver spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Hell of a place to send a woman alone." Mara didn't answer. She'd been sent to worse. The front door opened before she could knock. A man filled the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved from stone and suspicion. Callan Mercer. She recognized him from the description the agency provided, though they'd failed to mention the exhaustion pressed into every line of his face, or the way his eyes moved over her like she was something broken he'd ordered and received damaged. "You're the housekeeper?" His voice carried the rough edge of someone who didn't waste words. "Yes, sir. Mara Quinn." He looked past her toward the wagon, clearly searching for someone else. Someone younger, prettier, more useful. "How old are you?" 34? Something flickered across his expression. Disappointment, maybe anger. He stepped back without opening the door wider. "The agency said they were sending help, not—" He stopped himself, but Mara had heard enough unfinished sentences in her life to know exactly where that one was heading. "I can work," she said quietly. "That's what you need, isn't it? Someone who can work." For a long moment, he just stared at her. Behind him, somewhere deeper in the house, a child coughed. Wet, rattling, the sound of something that had been ignored too long. Callan's jaw tightened. "You'll sleep in the room off the kitchen. Meals are your responsibility. Laundry, cleaning, mending, all of it. The children don't need coddling. They need structure. I don't need conversation. I need competence. You understand?" "Yes, sir." "And if this doesn't work out, it will." He studied her again, looking for weakness, for hesitation. Mara had spent 34 years being looked at exactly like this. She didn't flinch. Finally, Callan stepped aside. The smell hit her first. Sickness, unwashed bodies, spoiled food, and beneath it all, grief. Thick and stale, like something rotting in the walls. The front room was dark despite the morning sun. Curtains drawn, furniture covered in dust, a cold fireplace filled with week-old ash. Callan grabbed her single suitcase from the wagon and dropped it inside the door. "Kitchen's through there, children's room's upstairs. My room's off limits. Don't touch anything that doesn't need touching." He was gone before she could respond. Boots heavy on the stairs, a door slamming somewhere overhead. The wagon driver appeared in the doorway, shaking his head. "Good luck, lady. You're gonna need it." He didn't wait for a reply, just climbed back onto his seat and snapped the reins. Within minutes, the wagon disappeared over the ridge, and Mara stood alone in the broken house. She let herself stand there for exactly 10 seconds, long enough to acknowledge the fear trying to crawl up her spine, long enough to remember every other door that had closed behind her, every other place she'd arrived unwanted. Then she picked up her suitcase and got to work. The kitchen was worse than the front room, dishes stacked in the basin, crusty with days-old food. A pot on the stove contained something that might have been stew once, now covered in white mold. The floor hadn't been swept in weeks. Mice droppings scattered across the counters. The pantry door hung open, revealing shelves mostly bare except for a few cans of beans, a bag of flour with a hole chewed through the bottom, and a jar of something unidentifiable. Mara set down her suitcase and rolled up her sleeves. She started with the stove, scraping out the ruined pot and setting water to boil. While it heated, she swept the floor, working in quick, efficient strokes that pushed the worst of the filth out the back door. The dishes came next, scrubbed, rinsed, stacked to dry. She found a relatively clean bowl and mixed flour with water and a pinch of salt, kneading it into rough biscuit dough. Footsteps creaked overhead. Small ones. Hesitant. Mara kept working. By noon, she'd transformed the kitchen into something functional. Not clean, that would take days, but usable. She'd baked 24 biscuits, opened the last cans of beans, and created something that resembled a meal. She arranged everything on the table and climbed the stairs. 3 doors. 2 open, 1 closed. The first room held 2 boys. The younger one couldn't have been more than 5, curled beneath a blanket that hadn't been washed in months, his face flushed with fever. The older boy, maybe 8, sat on the edge of his bed, watching her with eyes too wary for a child. "There's food downstairs," Mara said softly. "Biscuits and beans, still warm." The older boy didn't move. "Pa didn't say you could be here." "Your pa hired me. I'm the new housekeeper." "We don't need a housekeeper." "Maybe not, but I made biscuits anyway." She studied the younger boy's flushed face. "Your brother's sick." "He's fine. He's burning up with fever, and that cough sounds like pneumonia setting in." Mara kept her voice calm, stating facts without judgment. "When's the last time anyone checked on him?" The older boy's jaw tightened, a miniature version of his father's stubborn expression. "I check on him." "I'm sure you do." Mara nodded toward the stairs. "Come eat, both of you. I'll bring your brother's food up if he can't walk." She didn't wait for an answer, just moved to the second open door. A girl. Maybe 10 years old, sitting at a small desk with a book open in front of her, though Mara could tell she wasn't actually reading. Her hair hung in tangles around thin shoulders, and her dress looked 2 sizes too big, handed down, probably, from a mother who wasn't coming back. "Food's ready," Mara said. The girl didn't look up. "I'm not hungry." "Biscuits and beans, not fancy, but it's hot." "I said I'm not hungry." Mara recognized that tone, recognized the tight grip on the book's edges, the rigid posture, the careful blankness in the girl's expression. She'd worn that same armor herself years ago, when staying numb felt safer than feeling anything at all. "All right," Mara said quietly. "I'll leave a plate at the bottom of the stairs, in case you change your mind." She descended to the kitchen and found Callan standing in the doorway, staring at the table she'd set. "I didn't ask you to cook. The children need to eat. They've been eating fine." Mara glanced at the scrubbed pot she'd emptied earlier, the one growing mold, and said nothing. Callan's expression darkened. "I don't need you judging how I run my house." "I'm not judging. I'm cooking." She pulled out a chair and sat down, her back aching from the morning's work. "Your youngest has a fever. He needs medicine and clean bedding. Your daughter hasn't eaten in I don't know how long, and your oldest boy is trying to hold this family together by himself because you're—" She stopped. "Because I'm what?" Mara met his eyes. "Grieving, but grief doesn't feed children, Mr. Mercer." The silence stretched between them, sharp and dangerous. For a moment she thought he might throw her out right there, suitcase and all. His hands clenched into fists. His jaw worked like he was chewing words too bitter to swallow. Then footsteps sounded on the stairs. The oldest boy appeared first, defensive and protective, positioning himself between Mara and the doorway. Behind him came his younger brother, wrapped in a blanket, pale and shaking. "Jessie said there's biscuits," the little one whispered. Callan's expression cracked, just for a second, just long enough for Mara to see the father beneath the anger, the man drowning in more pain than he knew how to carry. "Sit down, Sam," he said roughly. "Eat." Jessie helped his brother into a chair. Sam reached for a biscuit with trembling hands, took one bite, and tears started sliding down his fever-bright face. "It's warm," he whispered. "Jessie, it's warm." Something broke in the kitchen then, something that had been holding all of them frozen in place. Jessie grabbed 2 biscuits for himself. Sam ate slowly, carefully, like the food might disappear if he rushed. Callan turned away, facing the window, his shoulders rigid. Mara stood and fixed a plate, then climbed the stairs one more time. She left it outside the girl's closed door and knocked once, gently. "It's there when you want it," she said to the wood. No answer. But when Mara checked an hour later, the plate was empty. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep and Callan had disappeared into his room, Mara explored the small space off the kitchen that would serve as her bedroom. It was barely more than a closet, a narrow cot, a trunk, a single window overlooking the darkened yard. She unpacked her suitcase, 2 dresses, one for work and one for Sunday, though she hadn't attended church in years, a coat with patches on the elbows, undergarments, a hairbrush, and at the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, a small silver locket. She didn't open it. Never did. Just touched it once, briefly, then returned it to the suitcase and slid the bag under the cot. The house settled around her, wood creaking in the cold. Somewhere upstairs, one of the boys coughed. The wind rattled the loose barn door, a rhythmic banging that nobody had fixed in months. Mara lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling. She'd been hired for 2 months. That's what the agency contract specified. 2 months to get the Mercer household functional again, then they'd find someone permanent. Someone younger. Someone the neighbors wouldn't whisper about. She'd heard those whispers already, standing in the general store that afternoon while buying supplies on the credit Callan had grudgingly arranged. "Did you see what Mercer brought in?" One woman, heavy-set with a pinched mouth. "Plain as a fence post and twice as old as he needs." "Desperate times," another replied, "though I can't imagine what use she'll be. A man like Callan needs proper help, not charity cases." "She won't last a week. Mark my words." Mara had paid for her flour and beans without looking at them, collected her packages, and walked out. She'd heard worse, much worse. Words only cut if you let them matter. But lying in the dark now, listening to the broken house breathe around her, she wondered how many more places she'd arrive before one of them finally let her stay. The next morning, she woke before dawn. Sam's fever hadn't broken. Mara found him curled in Jesse's bed, both boys sleeping in a tangle of blankets, Jesse's thin arm wrapped protectively around his brother. She touched Sam's forehead, still burning. Downstairs, she built up the fire and set water boiling. From the pantry, she pulled out the willow bark she'd purchased in town and brewed a bitter tea. When Sam woke, she made him drink it despite his protests, then wrapped him in every clean blanket she could find. "Why does it taste like dirt?" he whimpered. "Because medicine's supposed to taste terrible," Mara said. "That's how you know it's working." "That doesn't make sense." "Most things don't. Drink anyway." Jesse watched from the doorway, still wary, still measuring her against some standard only he understood. "Pa's gonna be mad you touched his stuff." "The willow bark was mine. Bought it yesterday." "You bought medicine for us?" Sam's eyes widened. "Why?" "Because nobody else was going to. Because she'd watched children die from fevers that should have been simple to cure. Because broken houses full of sick children were supposed to matter to someone." "Seemed practical," Mara said instead. She spent the day working through the house like a small, determined storm, scrubbing floors, washing windows, stripping beds, and boiling sheets in the massive pot she'd scoured clean. The dirt came off in layers, years of neglect made visible in gray water and filthy rags. Callan appeared around noon, taking in the chaos of laundry lines stretched across the kitchen, the smell of lye soap, the buckets of dirty water. "What the hell are you doing?" "Washing bedding. The children have been sleeping in filth." "I didn't authorize you to tear apart my house." "You authorized me to keep house. This is what that looks like." Mara wrung out another sheet, her hands red and raw. "You want it stopped? Say so. Otherwise, I'm finishing what I started." They stared at each other across the steaming kitchen. Callan's anger was palpable, radiating off him like heat. But beneath it, Mara saw something else. Shame, maybe. Or exhaustion so deep it had become part of his bones. "Pa!" Sam's voice called from upstairs. "Pa, I feel better. Miss Mara's tea made the hot go away." Callan's expression shifted. He looked toward the stairs, then back at Mara. "Don't get attached," he said quietly. "You're not staying." "I know." He left without another word. That evening, Mara discovered the girl standing in the kitchen doorway. Emma, Jesse had finally told her during the afternoon's laundry marathon. Emma Mercer, 10 years old, who hadn't spoken more than 5 words since her mother died. "Can you braid hair?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mara set down the pot she'd been scrubbing. "I can. Mama used to braid mine every morning." Emma's fingers twisted in the tangled mess hanging past her shoulders. "But I can't reach the back, and Jesse doesn't know how, and Pa—" She stopped. "Come here," Mara said gently. Emma crossed the kitchen slowly, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt. She sat in the chair Mara pulled out and flinched when Mara's fingers first touched her hair. "I'll be gentle," Mara promised. She worked slowly, carefully separating the tangles with patient fingers, never pulling hard enough to hurt. Emma sat rigid at first, then gradually relaxed as Mara's hands moved through the long strands, braiding them into a neat plait down her back. "Mama used to sing while she braided," Emma whispered. "I don't know many songs." "That's okay." Emma touched the finished braid, her eyes bright with tears she was fighting not to shed. "Thank you." She ran from the kitchen before Mara could respond. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Mara heard something besides coughing and grief echo through the house. Laughter. Sam's laughter, high and bright, as Jessie told him some story about a frog in the barn. It lasted maybe 30 seconds before cutting off abruptly, like they'd both remembered they weren't supposed to feel happy. But Mara had heard it, and lying in her narrow cot that night, listening to the wind and the creaking boards, and the sound of children sleeping without crying, she thought maybe, just maybe, this broken house had a chance, even if she wouldn't be there to see it fixed. The town made its opinions known quickly. Mara's first trip into Grey Bend for supplies happened on a Saturday morning. The streets were crowded with ranchers and farmers, their families clustered around wagons, everyone conducting the week's business with loud voices and hard bargains. She kept her head down and moved through the general store efficiently, collecting flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, salt pork, the basics needed to keep a family fed through a harsh frontier winter. The store owner, a thin man with wire spectacles, tallied her purchases with obvious reluctance. "This going on Mercer's account?" "Yes, sir." He made a mark in his ledger. "Heard he brought in a woman from back east." "I'm from Missouri, actually." "Same difference out here." He wrapped her packages without looking at her. "Folks are wondering how long you'll last." "Are they?" "Callan Mercer's not an easy man. Lost his wife 6 months back. Been different since." Mara counted out the items to make sure nothing was missing. "I'm just the housekeeper." "Right." The word carried enough skepticism to fill the room. "Well, good luck with that." She collected her packages and turned to leave, and nearly collided with 3 women blocking the doorway. The one in front was perhaps 40, dressed well, with sharp eyes that cataloged every patch on Mara's dress, every callus on her hands, every sign of a hard life lived without softness. "You're the one living at the Mercer place," she said. Not a question. "I work there, yes, ma'am." Interesting choice of words. The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Dorothy Pritchard. These are my friends, Eleanor and Susan. We make it our business to know everyone in Grey Bend." Mara Quinn. "Well, Miss Quinn, or is it Mrs.? "Miss." "How unfortunate." Dorothy's smile sharpened. "It must be difficult, arriving at your age without prospects, though I suppose housekeeping is one way to secure a position." Eleanor, younger and meaner, laughed, especially in a house with a widower and no wife to complain about it. The implications hung in the air like smoke. Mara had been through this before. Different town, different faces, same ugly assumptions. She could defend herself, explain, get angry, none of it would matter. These women had already decided who she was, so she did what she always did. "Excuse me," she said quietly, and stepped around them. "Running away so soon?" Dorothy called after her. "I thought you frontier types were supposed to be tougher than that." Mara kept walking, but she heard the laughter following her down the street and the whispers starting up in her wake, spreading like poison through the Saturday crowd. When she returned to the ranch, Callan was in the barn working on the broken door. He looked up when her wagon approached, but didn't acknowledge her beyond that single glance. Mara unloaded supplies in silence, carrying packages into the kitchen while he hammered loose boards back into place. The domestic rhythm of it felt strange, him working outside, her working inside, like they were pretending to be something they absolutely weren't. She was putting away the last of the flour when Jessie appeared in the doorway. "Did people say mean things to you in town?" Mara turned, surprised by the directness. "What makes you think that?" "Because they say mean things about everyone, especially people who are different." Jessie leaned against the doorframe, trying to look casual but failing. They said mean things about Ma before she got sick. Said she was too good for Pa, that she'd leave when she got tired of ranch life. But she didn't leave. No. Jessie's voice went quiet. She died instead. Mara dried her hands on her apron, choosing her next words carefully. People say mean things because it makes them feel bigger. Doesn't make the things true. Mrs. Pritchard told Pa he should send us to live with our aunt in Philadelphia. Said he couldn't raise us alone. What did your Pa say? Told her to mind her own damn business. A ghost of a smile crossed Jessie's face. She got real mad, but Pa didn't care. Your Pa loves you, that's what matters. Jessie studied her with those two old eyes. Do you have kids? The question hit like a fist. Mara turned back to the counter, busying herself with organizing cans that were already organized. No. Did you ever want them? Jessie, I'm just asking. I know. Mara forced herself to turn around to meet the boy's earnest gaze. Yes. Once. But things don't always work out the way we want. Because you're too old now? Because life's complicated. Jessie considered this. Emma likes you. She doesn't like most people anymore. Emma's had a hard time. We all have. Jessie pushed off from the doorframe. But you're different than the other ladies who came. You don't try to make us forget about Ma. You don't pretend everything's fine when it's not. Before Mara could respond, Callan's voice cut through the afternoon air. Jessie, get out here and help with this door. The boy fled, leaving Mara alone in the kitchen with a question she couldn't answer and a locket she refused to open buried in a suitcase under her cot. The following week brought the first real crisis. Mara woke to the sound of retching. She threw on her robe and ran upstairs to find Emma hunched over a chamber pot, violently ill, her small body shaking with chills despite the sweat soaking her nightgown. How long has she been like this? Mara demanded. Jessie stood in the hallway looking terrified. I don't know, I just heard her crying. Callan appeared, taking in the scene with alarm tightening his features. What happened? She's sick, fever and vomiting. Mara pressed a hand to Emma's forehead, burning hot. When did this start? Felt bad at dinner, Emma whimpered, but I didn't want to say anything. Why not? Because... Another wave of nausea cut her off. Mara grabbed the chamber pot, held Emma's hair back, and waited for the spell to pass. When it did, she looked at Callan. Has anyone else eaten anything unusual? Anything that might have spoiled? We all ate the same dinner you cooked. Then it's not food poisoning from tonight. Mara's mind raced through possibilities. Jessie, did you and Emma go anywhere yesterday? Touch anything strange? We were just in the barn. Doing what? Jessie shifted uncomfortably. Playing, in the hayloft. Show me. But Emma, your father will stay with Emma. Show me now. They left Callan kneeling beside his daughter and went to the barn. Jessie climbed the ladder to the loft with Mara right behind him. In the far corner, hidden behind loose hay, she found their secret, a small cache of dried berries, carefully collected and stored. Where did these come from? Jessie's face went pale. There's bushes growing behind the barn. The berries looked good, so we picked them. Mara's stomach dropped. She grabbed a handful and examined them in the lamplight. Dark purple, clustered tight, growing on woody stems. Did Emma eat any of these? Maybe a few yesterday? We were pretending they were candy and... Jessie's voice cracked. Are they bad? They're poisonous. Mara grabbed the boy's shoulders. How many did she eat? Think, Jessie. How many? I don't know. Maybe 10? Maybe more. She kept eating them while we played, and I didn't... It's not your fault. Mara's mind was already moving, calculating. Not enough berries to kill, probably, but enough to make her desperately sick. Come on. They ran back to the house. Emma was still vomiting, now bringing up nothing but bile. Callan looked up when they burst through the door, and Mara saw real fear in his expression. She ate poisonous berries, Mara said bluntly. Yesterday, from bushes behind the barn. We need to get it out of her system, all of it. How? Force her to keep vomiting until there's nothing left. Then activated charcoal to absorb what's already in her blood. I don't have any, but we can make it. Burn willow wood until it's pure carbon, crush it, mix it with water. Callan stared at her. You know how to do that? I've seen it done. Jessie, get every piece of willow wood from the firewood pile. Your pa and I are going to make Emma more sick before we can make her better." The next 3 hours were brutal. They forced Emma to drink salt water until her stomach had nothing left to expel. She cried, begged them to stop, went limp in Callan's arms while Mara held the cup to her cracked lips and made her swallow again. Jessie tended the fire, burning willow wood down to charcoal, crushing it according to Mara's instructions. By midnight, Emma had stopped vomiting and lay pale and exhausted in her bed. Mara made her drink the charcoal mixture, thick, black, horrible, and the girl managed to keep it down. "Will she be all right?" Callan's voice was raw. "I think so. But she needs watching tonight. If the fever gets worse or she stops breathing properly, I'll stay with her." "So will I." They sat on opposite sides of Emma's bed through the darkest hours of night. Callan held his daughter's hand while Mara monitored her breathing, her temperature, the color returning slowly to her lips. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Callan spoke. "Where did you learn about poisonous berries?" "Experience." That's not an answer. Mara didn't look at him, just kept her eyes on Emma's sleeping face. "I worked in a logging camp once. One of the cook's children ate nightshade berries. Nobody knew what to do. By the time someone rode for a doctor, the boy was dead." "How old were you?" 16. Silence stretched between them. Then Callan said, "You've been a lot of places." "Yes." "Never stayed anywhere long?" "No." "Why not?" Mara finally met his eyes across the bed. "Because places like Grey Bend don't let women like me stay, Mr. Mercer. They tolerate us when they need us and throw us out when they don't." "Is that what happened at the logging camp?" "That's what happened everywhere." She expected him to press for details, but he didn't. Just nodded once, like he understood things he had no right to understand, and turned his attention back to his daughter. Emma made it through the night. By morning, her fever had broken and she was asking for water in a weak but steady voice. Jessie cried with relief. Sam wanted to climb into bed with his sister until Mara explained she needed rest. Callan walked Mara downstairs and stopped her at the kitchen door. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saving her. Any doctor would have done the same." "We don't have a doctor. We have you." His expression was unreadable. "The agency sent you for 2 months. But if you wanted to stay longer..." "I don't stay longer anywhere, Mr. Mercer." "Why not?" Mara looked at him, this broken man with his broken house and his children who'd almost lost another person they loved, and told him the truth. "Because the second I start believing a place wants me, that's when they remind me I was only ever temporary." She walked away before he could respond. But later that day, she found a plate of food waiting in her room. Not the leftovers she usually ate after the family finished. A real plate, with fresh cooked meat and vegetables and biscuits still warm from the oven. No note, no explanation, just food, left by someone who'd noticed she always ate last and alone. Mara sat on her narrow cot and ate slowly, every bite tasting like something dangerously close to hope. And that terrified her more than any poisonous berry ever could. Yum. By the end of the 3rd week, the Mercer ranch had changed. Not dramatically, not obviously, but in small ways that accumulated like snow drifting against a fence. Invisible at first, then suddenly substantial. The house stayed clean now. Meals appeared on time. Laundry got done. The children wore mended clothes and went to bed with full stomachs. Sam's cough had finally faded. Emma spoke in full sentences. Jessie started smiling again carefully, like he wasn't sure he was allowed but wanted to try anyway. And Callan stopped slamming doors. Mara noticed it one morning when he came in from the barn. He opened the kitchen door, stepped inside, and closed it quietly behind him instead of letting it bang shut like he'd been doing for months. "Coffee's ready?" she said without turning around. "Thanks." He poured himself a cup and stood at the window watching the sunrise paint the frozen hills. Mara scrambled eggs and tried not to think about how domestic this felt, how dangerous it was to get comfortable with routines that couldn't last. "I'm riding into town today," Callan said. "Need anything?" "Sugar and lamp oil, lists on the counter." He picked it up, studied her neat handwriting. "You have good penmanship." "My mother was a school teacher. Before." "Before what?" Mara flipped the eggs. "Before everything that came after." She felt him watching her, trying to piece together a story from fragments she'd never fully give him. After a moment, he set down the list and walked toward the door. Callan? She used his first name without thinking, and they both froze. What? The children are doing better, in case you haven't noticed. His hand rested on the doorknob. I've noticed. Good. He left without another word, but something had shifted between them. Something small, but unmistakable. That afternoon, while Callan was still in town, Dorothy Pritchard arrived at the ranch in an expensive buggy driven by a hired man. Mara was hanging laundry when the buggy pulled up. She set down the clothespin basket and waited, already knowing this visit wasn't social. Dorothy climbed down wearing a dress that cost more than Mara earned in a year. Miss Quinn, how industrious you are. Mrs. Pritchard. I thought I'd pay a visit, see how you're settling in. Dorothy's gaze swept across the clean yard, the repaired fence posts, the smoke curling from the chimney. My, you have been busy. Just doing my job. Of course. Dorothy smiled that sharp smile. Though I wonder if Mr. Mercer realizes exactly what job you think you're doing here. Mara didn't rise to the bait. Was there something you needed? Only to extend an invitation. Several of us ladies meet on Wednesdays for a sewing circle. You'd be welcome to join us. It was a trap. Mara recognized it instantly. Accept, and they'd spend the afternoon picking apart every decision she'd made, every choice Callan had allowed her. Decline, and she'd confirm their suspicions that she was hiding something. That's kind of you, Mara said carefully, but I'm needed here. Surely Mr. Mercer can spare you for one afternoon. Mrs. Pritchard, or perhaps you're worried about leaving him alone with the children. Dorothy's eyes glittered. Though I suppose some women feel the need to guard their territory, especially when their claim is so tenuous. There it was, the real accusation beneath the polite words. Mara met Dorothy's gaze steadily. I'm the housekeeper. There's no territory to guard. Really? Because from where I'm standing, you seem remarkably comfortable in another woman's home. This isn't... Mara stopped herself. Isn't what? Her home anymore? Dorothy stepped closer. Caroline Mercer was my friend. A good woman who loved this ranch and those children with everything she had. And now here you are, wearing her apron, sleeping under her roof, cooking in her kitchen. Tell me, Miss Quinn, how does that feel? The words hit harder than they should have. Because Dorothy wasn't entirely wrong. Mara was living in a dead woman's space, filling a dead woman's role, pretending she belonged in a home that had never been meant for her. I'm sorry for your loss, Mara said quietly, but I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm just trying to help. Help? Dorothy's laugh was cruel. Is that what you call it when you isolate a grieving man and his children, make them dependent on you, position yourself as indispensable? That's not... Women like you are all the same. Desperate, predatory, thinking you can seduce your way into security. I've never... Callan Mercer deserves better than some aged spinster throwing herself at him. The slap came before Mara realized her hand was moving. Dorothy staggered back, pressing a palm to her reddening cheek, shock and fury warring on her face. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Dorothy's expression hardened into something vicious. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, she hissed. She climbed into her buggy and snapped orders at the driver. Within seconds, they were racing back toward town, leaving Mara standing in the yard with her hands still trembling and her heart pounding so hard she thought she might be sick. She'd just struck one of the most powerful women in Graybend. Over words. Over a job she was going to lose anyway. Mara walked to the barn, sat down in the hay, and put her head in her hands. This was it. This was how it would end. Dorothy would tell the whole town. Callan would fire her to avoid scandal. The agency would blacklist her. And she'd move on to the next town, the next job, the next place that didn't want her, just like always. She was still sitting there when Callan's wagon rolled into the yard 2 hours later. Callan found her at the barn just before sunset. Mara heard his boots on the wooden floor, but didn't look up from where she sat against a hay bale, arms wrapped around her knees. One of the hands said Dorothy Pritchard was here. His voice was careful, neutral. Said she left in a hurry. Mara didn't answer. Callan crouched down in front of her, close enough that she could see dirt under his fingernails and a fresh cut on his knuckle. What happened? I hit her. She expected shock, anger. Instead, Callan's mouth twitched. You hit Dorothy Pritchard? She said things. I shouldn't have. I lost my temper. What kind of things? Mara finally looked at him. Does it matter? She's probably telling everyone in Greybend right now. By tomorrow, the whole valley will know I struck a respectable woman. Respectable, Callan snorted. Dorothy Pritchard is a lot of things, but respectable isn't top of the list. She was your wife's friend. She was Caroline's social obligation. There's a difference. He settled onto the barn floor, stretching his legs out. What did she say to make you hit her? That I was trying to seduce you. That I was some desperate spinster positioning myself to trap a widower. The words tasted bitter, coming out. She called me predatory. Callan was quiet for a long moment. And that's why you hit her? No. Mara's voice cracked. I hit her because she said I was wearing a dead woman's apron and pretending this was my home when I had no right to any of it, and she was right. The hell she was. Callan, this is my ranch, my house, my decision who works here. His voice went hard. Dorothy Pritchard doesn't get a say in that. Neither does anyone else in town. You're going to fire me anyway. Better to do it now before this gets worse. Who said I'm firing you? Mara stared at him. I just assaulted one of the most influential women in the territory. Good. Someone should have done it years ago. Callan stood and offered his hand. Come on. Dinner's not going to cook itself. She took his hand without thinking, let him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm, calloused, steadier than she expected. Dorothy will make trouble, Mara warned. Let her try. They walked back to the house together as the last sunlight bled across the hills. Inside, the children were setting the table. Emma arranging forks with careful precision, Jessie hauling plates, Sam trying to fold napkins into shapes that didn't quite work. Miss Mara, Sam bounced over. Look, I made a bird. Well, it's supposed to be a bird. Jessie says it looks like a dead mouse, but I think... He stopped, noticing her face. Are you sad? No, honey, just tired. Pa says when grown-ups are tired, it means they're sad, but don't want to say so. Callan cleared his throat. That's enough, Sam. But it's true. You say it all the... Table. Now. Sam scampered off. Emma glanced at Mara with worried eyes, but didn't say anything. Jessie just watched, reading the tension the way he always did, understanding more than a child should. Mara cooked chicken and potatoes while the family settled around the table. The normalcy of it felt surreal after the afternoon's disaster. She kept waiting for Callan to change his mind, to tell her to pack her things, but he just ate dinner and asked Jessie about the fence posts they'd repaired that morning. After the children went to bed, Mara cleaned the kitchen in silence. Callan sat at the table nursing coffee, watching her work. You don't have to stay, he said finally, her hands stilled in the wash basin. I know. I mean, if you want to leave before Dorothy makes this worse, I'll write you a reference. Pay for your travel to wherever you want to go. Mara turned to face him. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. Yes, it does. Callan set down his cup. You asked me once why I hired you. Truth is, I didn't want anyone. The neighbors contacted the agency behind my back because they couldn't stand watching my kids go hungry. When that wagon showed up, I was ready to send whoever it was straight back to town. But you didn't. No. Because you looked at my broken house and sick children, and instead of judging or pitying, you just rolled up your sleeves and got to work. He met her eyes. You saved Emma's life. You made Sam's fever break. You got Jessie to smile again. Hell, you even got me to stop slamming doors. That's just basic housekeeping. It's a lot more than that, and you know it. He stood, walked to the window. But Dorothy's right about one thing. You don't belong here. Not because you're not good enough, because this valley's too small and mean for someone like you. Someone like me? Someone who actually gives a damn. Mara dried her hands slowly. I'll stay. If you'll have me. You sure? So once Dorothy starts talking, I've survived worse than gossip, Callan. He turned from the window, studied her face like he was trying to read a map with half the landmarks missing. All right then. We'll deal with whatever comes. What came arrived 3 days later. Mara was in town buying supplies when she noticed the stares. Not the usual curious glances, active hostility. Women crossed the street to avoid her. Men looked through her like she wasn't there. The general store owner took her order without speaking, his face set in hard disapproval. She loaded her packages into the wagon and was climbing into the seat when a rock hit the side panel. Mara spun around. 3 teenage boys stood across the street, grinning. One of them bent to pick up another rock. "That's what happens to whores who hit their betters," the tallest one called. The rock flew. Mara ducked and it sailed past, clattering against the wagon bed. "Hey!" A man's voice cut through the afternoon. "Drop that rock right now." The boys scattered. Mara looked up to see Tom Fletcher, a neighboring rancher she'd met once at the feed store. He crossed the street with long strides, his weathered face angry. "You all right, Miss Quinn?" "I'm fine." "No, you're not, and those boys should know better." Tom glanced at the watching townspeople. "What the hell is wrong with all of you? She's just trying to buy supplies." Nobody answered, but nobody moved to help either. Tom climbed up onto the wagon seat beside her. "I'll ride with you back to the Mercer place. Make sure nobody tries anything stupid." "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is. Go on, drive." Mara snapped the reins. They rode in silence until Gray Bend disappeared behind them. Then Tom said, "I heard about the trouble with Dorothy Pritchard." "I'm sure everyone has. She's telling folks you attacked her unprovoked, says you're unstable, dangerous around children." Mara's hands tightened on the reins. "I also heard," Tom continued, "from my wife, who heard from her sister, who was actually there when Dorothy came home, that Dorothy had scratch marks on her arms like she'd been grabbing at someone, and her knuckles were bruised like she'd been doing some hitting herself." Mara glanced at him. "Your point?" "My point is, Dorothy Pritchard's been running this valley like her personal kingdom for 15 years. Someone finally standing up to her probably did more good than harm." Tom adjusted his hat, though I admit didn't expect it to be a housekeeper from Missouri. "I didn't plan it." Best things usually aren't planned. He was quiet for a moment. "How are the Mercer kids doing? Haven't seen them in town lately." "Better. Sam's fever broke. Emma's eating again. Jesse's helping his father with ranch work." "And Callan?" "Surviving." Tom nodded slowly. "He was in bad shape after Caroline died. Whole town was worried. Some folks thought, well, doesn't matter what they thought. Point is, those kids needed help and you provided it. Don't let Dorothy make you ashamed of that." They reached the turnoff to the Mercer ranch. Tom climbed down and tipped his hat. "You need anything, Miss Quinn? My place is 2 miles south, Fletcher Ranch. My wife Mary's always glad for company." "Thank you." "And Miss Quinn, watch your back. Dorothy doesn't forget slights, real or imagined." He headed back toward town, leaving Mara alone with her supplies, and a warning she already knew she should have heeded. That night at dinner, Jesse asked the question they'd all been thinking. "Are people being mean to you in town?" Mara passed the potatoes. "Some people are always mean, honey. Doesn't have anything to do with me." "But they are." Emma's voice was small. "Aren't they?" Callan set down his fork. "What happened?" "Nothing happened." "Mara." She met his eyes across the table. "Some teenage boys threw rocks at the wagon. Tom Fletcher intervened. It's fine." "It's not fine." Callan's voice went dangerously quiet. "Who were they?" "I don't know their names." "Describe them." "Callan." "Describe them." Mara did. Callan's expression darkened with each detail. When she finished, he stood abruptly. "Where are you going?" Jesse asked. "To have a conversation with some people about teaching their sons manners." "Pa, it's dark." "I'll be back by morning." Callan grabbed his coat and hat. "Mara, bar the door after I leave. Don't open it for anyone but me." He was gone before she could argue. The children stared at their plates. Finally, Sam whispered, "Is Pa going to hit someone?" "Probably," Jesse said. "Jesse," Mara started. "What?" "He will. When people mess with our family, Pa doesn't just talk." Jesse looked at her. "And you're family now, whether you like it or not." The simple declaration hit harder than it should have. Mara had been called many things in 34 years. Housekeeper, burden, charity case, worse. But family? That word didn't attach itself to women like her. "I'm just the hired help," she said quietly. "No, you're not." Emma reached across the table and took Mara's hand. "You're the one who makes breakfast every morning, who braids my hair, who sits with Sam when he has nightmares. Hired help doesn't do that." "Your sister's right," Jesse added. "Hired help doesn't risk getting hit by rocks for us either." Mara looked at these 3 children. Skinny, scarred by loss, desperate for stability they'd been denied too long, and felt something crack open in her chest. The same thing she'd kept carefully locked away for years because wanting things, caring about things, always led to pain when they were inevitably taken away. "Finish your dinner," she managed. "Then bed, all of you." They obeyed without argument. After the dishes were washed and the children tucked in, Mara sat in the kitchen with a single lamp burning, waiting for Callan to return. He came back just before dawn. Mara heard the horse first, then boots on the porch. She unbarred the door and found him standing there, knuckles split and bleeding, his expression grim. "Did you kill anyone?" she asked. "No." "Did you want to?" "Yes." She stepped aside to let him in. "Sit down. I'll get water and bandages." Callan dropped into a chair while Mara assembled supplies. His hands were a mess. 2 knuckles split deep enough to need stitching, bruises already forming across his right hand. "Who'd you hit?" She cleaned the blood gently. "Everyone who deserved it." "Callan, the Morrison boy, his older brother, their father when he tried to stop me." Callan winced as she dabbed antiseptic on the cuts. "Also had words with Dorothy's husband. Explained in very clear terms what happens if his wife spreads any more lies about you. You can't fight the whole town. Watch me. This is only going to make things worse." "For who?" Callan caught her wrist, stopping her ministrations. "You think I care what Dorothy Pritchard says? What any of them say? They stood by and did nothing while my kids went hungry. They judged instead of helping. You showed up and actually fixed things. I'm just one person. You're the only person who mattered." He released her wrist. "Finish the bandaging. My hands hurt like hell." Mara worked in silence, wrapping clean cloth around his battered knuckles. When she finished, Callan flexed his fingers experimentally. "Thank you. Don't thank me for patching up damage you shouldn't have done in the first place. Someone throws rocks at you. I'm going to do damage. That's not negotiable." "You can't protect me from every insult, Callan." "Maybe not, but I can damn well try." The words hung between them, carrying weight neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Mara started putting away the medical supplies, needing something to do with her hands. "Get some sleep," she said. You look terrible." "Always so flattering." "It's the truth." Callan stood, swaying slightly. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed, even if it makes everything more complicated. Nothing about this was ever simple." "No, but at least now it's complicated in interesting ways." He headed upstairs, leaving Mara alone in the kitchen with the first gray light of dawn creeping through the windows and a feeling she couldn't quite name settling in her chest. The next week brought changes Mara hadn't anticipated. Tom Fletcher's wife, Mary, showed up at the ranch with fresh bread and an invitation to visit. "Don't mind the town gossips," she said firmly. "Half of them are just jealous Dorothy finally met someone who wouldn't put up with her nonsense." 2 days later, another rancher's wife appeared with preserved fruit and stories about her own run-ins with Grayben's so-called respectable ladies. By the end of the week, 3 more women had visited, each one quietly defying the social order Dorothy tried to enforce. But the support came with a cost. Mara noticed it first at the general store. The owner started charging higher prices for the Mercer account. Supplies that should have been in stock mysteriously weren't available. Special orders took twice as long to arrive. Then the bank called in a small loan Callan had taken out the previous year. Nothing catastrophic, but the timing was suspicious. "This is Dorothy's doing," Callan said, studying the bank notice. "She's got her husband pressuring the bank manager. Can you pay it? If I sell some cattle. But I was planning to use those for breeding stock come spring." He crumpled the paper. "Damn woman's determined to make an example of us." "Of me," Mara corrected. "I'm the one who hit her. We're in this together now." The solidarity should have felt good. Instead, it terrified her. Because together implied something permanent, something Mara had learned long ago not to trust. The trouble escalated 2 weeks after the rock-throwing incident. Mara was hanging laundry when she noticed smoke rising from the north pasture. Too much smoke. Too black. She dropped the washing and ran toward the barn, yelling for Callan. He emerged from the horse stall, took one look at the smoke, and cursed. "The hay storage." They ran together across the frozen field. By the time they reached the small outbuilding where Callan stored winter feed for the cattle, flames were already eating through the roof. The door hung open, not broken, deliberately opened. "This was set," Callan said flatly. "How can you tell?" "Because I locked that door myself this morning." He pointed to the ground. "And those are boot prints, fresh ones. They fought the fire with buckets from the nearby creek, but it was useless. The building was old, dry, perfect kindling. Within an hour, the entire structure collapsed in a shower of sparks, taking with it 3 months' worth of stored hay." Callan stood watching the ruins, his face carved from granite. "That hay was meant to last until spring. Now I'll have to buy more at twice the price, if I can even find anyone willing to sell to me. We can ration what's left. There is no rationing this, Mara. Without that hay, the cattle will starve before new grass comes in." He turned to face her. Whoever did this wasn't trying to scare us. They were trying to destroy us. That night, Callan rode into town alone. He returned hours later with news that made Mara's blood run cold. "I talked to every rancher in the valley. Same story from all of them. No hay to spare, sorry for our trouble, can't help us." Callan poured himself whiskey with shaking hands. "Tom Fletcher pulled me aside after, said Dorothy's been making rounds, telling everyone that doing business with the Mercer ranch means losing her family's patronage. So she's cutting off your access to supplies, to everything, feed, equipment repairs, even basic goods from town." Callan downed the whiskey in one swallow. "And it's working. The valley's too small. Everyone's too dependent on the Pritchard family's money to risk crossing Dorothy." Mara sat down slowly. "This is my fault. It's her fault for being a vindictive. I should leave. If I'm gone, she'll have no reason to keep punishing you." "You think she'll stop if you leave?" Callan laughed bitterly. "Dorothy doesn't forgive, Mara. She's already decided we're her enemies. You leaving won't change that." "Then what do we do?" "I don't know." For the first time since she'd met him, Callan looked defeated. "I just don't know." The answer came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the fire, a man Mara didn't recognize appeared at the ranch driving a wagon loaded with hay bales. He was older, maybe 60, with skin weathered dark from decades of sun, and a face that suggested he didn't smile often but found the world amusing anyway. "Heard you folks had some trouble," he said, climbing down. "Name's Jack Brennan. Got a spread about 20 miles west, near the border." Callan stepped out of the barn, immediately wary. "We didn't order hay." "I know. I brought it anyway." Jack gestured to the loaded wagon. "Figured you could use it, what with your storage burning down and all." "How much?" "How much what?" "How much do you want for it?" Jack scratched his jaw. "Well, now that's an interesting question. See, I heard some things about why your hay burned, heard about Dorothy Pritchard and her campaign to run a certain housekeeper out of the valley, and I thought to myself, any woman who can make Dorothy that angry must be doing something right." Mara emerged from the house, wiping flour from her hands. Jack's eyes lit up. "You must be the famous Miss Quinn. Heard you slap Dorothy across the face in her own yard." "I didn't slap her, Mara stopped. "It doesn't matter." "Oh, it matters. Woman like Dorothy needs someone to stand up to her every few years. Keeps her honest." Jack pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. "This is a bill of sale for 40 bales of hay at standard market rate. I'll take payment whenever you can manage it. No interest, no timeline." Callan took the paper suspiciously. "Why would you do this?" "Because Dorothy Pritchard once tried to run my daughter out of Gray Bend for marrying a man Dorothy deemed unsuitable. My girl ended up moving to California, and I haven't seen her in 8 years. Jack's expression hardened. "So let's just say I have personal reasons for not wanting Dorothy to win this particular fight. Even if it costs you business? I'm too old and too far from town for Dorothy's influence to matter much. Besides, I like underdogs." Jack tipped his hat to Mara. Pleasure meeting the woman who finally told Dorothy Pritchard exactly where she could shove her opinions. He left before they could protest further, the empty wagon rattling back down the road. Callan stared at the hay bales like they might disappear. "Did that actually just happen?" "I think so," Mara said. "Someone helped us, without asking for anything." "Apparently." Callan looked at her, and for the first time in days, something like hope flickered across his face. "Maybe we're not as alone as I thought." But that hope proved fragile. 2 days later, Mara took the children into town for new shoes. Sam's boots had worn completely through, and winter wasn't finished yet. She'd saved money from her salary specifically for this, determined to handle it herself without asking Callan. The cobbler's shop was warm and smelled of leather and polish. Mr. Henderson, the owner, was fitting Sam for boots when Dorothy Pritchard walked in. The temperature in the room dropped immediately. Dorothy looked at Mara, then at the children, then back at Mara with an expression of such pure contempt that Jesse instinctively moved closer to his siblings. "I see you're still pretending to belong here," Dorothy said. Mara kept her voice level. "We're just buying shoes." "Using Callan Mercer's money, I assume. How convenient for you." "I'm using my own money." "Your salary, you mean, which comes from Callan. Same difference." Dorothy examined her gloves with studied casualness. "Tell me, Miss Quinn, how does it feel to live off a man's charity while destroying his reputation?" "We're not having this conversation." "Oh, I think we are." Dorothy stepped closer. "You've made yourself quite comfortable in that ranch, haven't you? Playing mother to children who already had one. Playing wife to a man who doesn't want you." "Mrs. Pritchard," Mr. Henderson started. "Stay out of this, Henderson." Dorothy's eyes never left Mara. "I want her to understand exactly what she's done. She's made Callan Mercer a pariah in his own community, turned him against people who've known him his whole life. And for what? So some aging spinster can pretend she finally matters?" Emma grabbed Mara's hand, squeezing tight. Jessie moved in front of Sam, protective. Mara felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. "Are you finished?" "Not even close. I'm going to tell you what happens next. You're going to pack your things and leave the Mercer Ranch. Tonight. And if you don't, I will personally ensure that Callan loses everything. The bank will call in his loans, the feed stores will refuse his business, every rancher in this valley will turn their back on him." Dorothy smiled. "You think burning his hay storage was bad? That was just a warning. I can do so much worse." "You're threatening arson." "I'm stating facts. Accidents happen on struggling ranches. Tragic, really, how often buildings catch fire when proper precautions aren't taken." Mara's vision narrowed. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to avoid escalating this further. But she looked at Emma's terrified face, at Jessie's clenched fists, at Sam trying not to cry, and something in her snapped. "No," she said quietly. Dorothy blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said no. I'm not leaving. You can threaten whatever you want, but I'm not running because you've decided you don't like me." "You stupid woman, I will destroy him." "Then you'll destroy him, but I won't make it easy for you." Mara stepped forward, and Dorothy actually backed up. "You want to know what I think? I think you're scared. Scared that Callan might actually be happy with someone you didn't choose for him. Scared that those children might heal without your permission. Scared that you're losing control of a valley you've manipulated for years. How dare you?" "I dare because I have nothing to lose, Mrs. Pritchard. You can take my job, my reputation, whatever you want, but you can't make me invisible anymore, and you can't stand that." Dorothy's face flushed red. "You'll regret this." "Probably. But at least I'll regret it on my own terms." Mara gathered the children and walked out, leaving Dorothy sputtering in the cobbler's shop. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely help Sam into the wagon. "That was amazing," Jessie breathed. "That was stupid," Mara corrected. "No." Emma's voice was firm. "That was brave." They rode home in silence. Mara's mind raced through the implications of what she'd just done. She'd essentially declared war on the most powerful woman in the valley. Dorothy wouldn't forgive this. Wouldn't forget. Callan was waiting when they returned. One look at Mara's face told him something had happened. "Kids inside, now!" They scattered. Callan waited until the door closed behind them. "What happened?" Mara told him. "Everything." Dorothy's threats, the ultimatum, her own refusal to leave. When she finished, Callan was quiet for a long time. "You should have taken her deal," he said finally. The words hit like a physical blow. "You want me to leave?" "I want you safe. And staying here isn't safe anymore. Since when has safe mattered? You hired me knowing this valley would judge. You kept me knowing it would cause trouble." Mara's voice rose. "You can't ask me to care about those children and then tell me to abandon them the second things get difficult. I'm not asking you to abandon them. I'm asking you to survive. I'm tired of just surviving, Callan." The admission burst out before she could stop it. "I'm tired of running from every town that decides I don't belong. Tired of being nothing to anyone." "You're not nothing. Then let me stay. Let me fight. Even if we lose, at least let me fight. Callan stared at her, conflict clear on his face. Then he turned away, hands clenched. I can't protect you from this. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to stand with me. And if Dorothy follows through, if she burns down the barn next time, or poisons the well, or... His voice cracked. I already lost Caroline. I can't... He didn't finish. Didn't have to. Mara understood then that this wasn't about her safety at all. It was about his fear of losing someone else. Another person he'd let himself depend on. She walked over and stood in front of him until he looked at her. I'm not Caroline, she said gently, and I'm not dying. I'm just refusing to disappear because some bitter woman decided I'm not worth basic human decency. This is bigger than Dorothy. I know, but it starts with her. Callan searched her face. You're really not going to back down, are you? No? Even knowing what it might cost? Especially knowing what it might cost. Something shifted in his expression. Resignation, maybe, or reluctant admiration. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Can it be both? He almost smiled. Almost. All right, we do this your way, but on one condition. What? Next time Dorothy threatens you, you tell me immediately. No more handling things alone. That's not how I... Those are the terms, Mara. Take them or pack your bags. She met his eyes and saw he meant it. Fine. We face this together. Together, he agreed. Neither of them acknowledged how significant that word was, how much weight it carried for two people who'd spent years learning not to trust anyone. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, the ranch quiet around them, and made a silent promise to fight for something neither of them had ever really believed they deserved. Each other. The valley. Home. Dorothy's retaliation came faster than expected. The first sign appeared 3 days later when Callan returned from checking the cattle. His face was ashen, jaw tight with barely controlled rage. Mara met him at the barn, took one look at his expression, and felt her stomach drop. What happened? 4 cows dead, poisoned. He dismounted roughly, nearly stumbling. Found them in the south pasture. Foam around their mouths, eyes rolled back. Same way cattle die when they eat contaminated feed. Contaminated how? I don't know yet, but it wasn't natural. Callan grabbed a shovel from the barn wall. I need to bury them before the kids see. Can you keep them inside? Mara nodded and watched him ride back toward the pasture, shoulders bent under invisible weight. Inside the house, the children were arguing over a checker game. She invented tasks to keep them occupied while her mind raced through possibilities. Poisoned cattle meant someone had accessed their pasture, had fed the animals something lethal, had deliberately tried to destroy Callan's livelihood. By evening, Callan had buried the dead animals and sent samples of their stomach contents to a veterinarian 2 towns over. He sat at the kitchen table pushing food around his plate without eating. 4 cows, he said quietly. That's nearly 1/10 of my herd gone in one day. If this keeps happening, it won't. You don't know that. Neither do you. Mara refilled his coffee. Eat something. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. Yes, ma'am. The words held no humor. Jessie appeared in the doorway, having snuck downstairs after bedtime. Pa? I heard you talking about the cows. Is it bad? Callan's face softened slightly. Go back to bed, son. I'm not a kid anymore. I can handle bad news. You're 10 years old. That makes you a kid. I'm old enough to help. Old enough to know when you're lying about things being fine. Jessie's voice cracked. Just tell me the truth. Are we going to lose the ranch? The silence stretched painful and long. Mara watched Callan struggle with the weight of honest words versus protective lies. Finally, he gestured to the chair beside him. Sit down. Jessie sat. Callan didn't soften the truth. Someone poisoned 4 of our cows. If they do it again, we'll lose more. We're already short on hay because of the fire, and now we're short on cattle, too. So yes, son, if this continues, we might lose the ranch. Mara expected Jessie to cry. Instead, the boy's expression hardened into something far too adult. Who's doing it? I don't know for certain. But you suspect. Callan glanced at Mara, then back at his son. Yeah, I suspect. Mrs. Pritchard. Jessie, it's her, isn't it? Because of Miss Mara. Jessie's hands clenched into fists. She's punishing us because Miss Mara stood up to her. We don't have proof. We don't need proof. Everyone knows what she's like. Jessie stood abruptly. I could go to her house, tell her to stop, tell her we'll make Miss Mara leave if she just stops hurting our animals. No. Mara's voice was sharp. Absolutely not. But if that's what she wants me broken, Mara said. Wants me to know that staying here means destroying everything you love. But giving her what she wants won't stop this, Jessie. It'll just teach her that threats and poison work. Jessie looked between them, young and furious and helpless. So what do we do? We survive, Callan said. Same as always. That's not a plan, Pa. That's just hoping things get better. Sometimes hope's all you've got. Jessie left without being dismissed, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Mara started clearing dishes, her hands moving mechanically. He's right, you know, she said. Hope isn't a plan. You got a better idea? Find proof. Real proof that Dorothy's behind this. Mara set down a plate carefully. If we can prove she's paying people to sabotage us, then what? Take it to the sheriff? He's been in the Pritchard family's pocket for 20 years. Callan pushed back from the table. This valley runs on money and influence, Mara. We have neither. We have truth. Truth doesn't mean much when the people with power decide it doesn't. He was right, and they both knew it. Mara finished the dishes in silence while Callan sat staring at nothing, trapped between rage and exhaustion. That night, unable to sleep, Mara lay in her narrow cot and stared at the ceiling. She'd faced difficult situations before, been run out of towns, lost jobs, survived things she'd never speak about. But this felt different, because it wasn't just her anymore. It was Callan and Jessie and Emma and Sam. It was a family she'd never meant to care about, and a home she'd never expected to want. And Dorothy Pritchard was going to take all of it away unless Mara found a way to stop her. The answer came from an unlikely source 2 days later. Tom Fletcher arrived at dawn, his wagon loaded with feed sacks. But instead of unloading, he gestured for Callan to follow him away from the house, away from where anyone might overhear. Mara watched from the kitchen window, anxiety prickling her spine. After 10 minutes, Callan returned alone. His expression was unreadable. What did Tom want? To warn us. Callan poured coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. He's been hearing things, talk at the saloon mostly, about a man named Vernon Hale. Who's Vernon Hale? Cattle baron from over near Red Hollow. Owns about a third of the grazing land in 3 territories. Callan sat heavily. According to Tom, Hale's been quietly buying up struggling ranches across the valley, paying pennies on the dollar for land people can't afford to keep. Mara frowned. What's that got to do with Dorothy? Everything, maybe. Tom says Dorothy's brother works for Hale, has for years. And lately, Hale's been particularly interested in properties around Gray Bend. Understanding dawned cold and sharp. You think Dorothy's working with Hale? Forcing people out so he can buy cheap? I think it's possible. Tom mentioned 3 ranches that sold to Hale in the last year. All of them had mysterious problems right before selling, poisoned wells, burned barns, sick cattle. Like us. Like us? Callan's jaw tightened. If Dorothy's helping Hale destroy competition, that makes this about more than just personal grudges. It makes it business. Which means she won't stop until we're gone, or until we prove what she's doing and expose her. Callan looked at Mara. Tom says there's an old supply depot about 15 miles north. Used to service freight lines before the railroad changed routes. It's been abandoned for years, but he's heard rumors people still use it. For storage, for meetings, for things they don't want noticed. You think Dorothy and Hale meet there? I think it's worth checking. Callan stood. I'm riding out tonight to look around. Not alone, you're not. Mara, if you're walking into something dangerous, you need backup. What if you get hurt and nobody knows where you are? What if we both get hurt and the kids are left alone? That stopped her, but only for a moment. Then we bring someone else, Tom, maybe, or Jack Brennan. I'm not dragging more people into this mess. They're already in it. Everyone in this valley is, whether they admit it or not. Mara crossed her arms. You taught Jessie that hope isn't a plan. Well, neither is riding off alone to investigate criminals in the middle of the night. Callan studied her, frustration, and something that might have been respect warring on his face. "You're not going to back down on this, are you?" "When have I ever backed down?" "Fair point," he sighed. "All right, we go together, but we tell Tom where we're headed and when to expect us back. If we're not home by dawn, he comes looking." Agreed. They spent the day preparing. Callan cleaned his rifle and checked ammunition while Mara packed supplies and explained to the confused children that she and their father had urgent business to attend to that night. Jesse looked suspicious, but didn't argue. Emma just held Mara's hand tighter than usual. "You're coming back, right?" Sam asked. "Of course, honey." "You promise?" Mara met his wide, worried eyes and felt her throat tighten. "I promise." She hoped it wasn't a lie. They left just after midnight. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light and sharp shadows. Callan led the way on his gelding, while Mara followed on the mare she'd learned to ride over the past weeks. The night was bitterly cold, their breath fogging in the air. Neither spoke much during the ride. There wasn't much to say. They both understood the risk, understood what finding proof might cost, and what finding nothing might mean. The depot appeared after nearly 2 hours of riding. It crouched against the landscape like something dead and forgotten, a cluster of weathered buildings, a loading platform rotting into the ground, rail tracks that disappeared under snow and weeds. Callan dismounted and gestured for Mara to do the same. They tied the horses 100 yards away and approached on foot. "Looks abandoned," Mara whispered. "That's the point." Callan pointed to fresh wagon tracks in the snow. "But someone's been here recently." They split up, each taking a different building. Mara's held nothing but broken crates and animal droppings. The second building was the same, but the third, the largest warehouse structure, had a heavy padlock on the door, new, expensive, completely out of place on a supposedly abandoned depot. Callan examined it in the moonlight. "This lock costs more than most ranchers make in a month. Can you open it?" "Not without breaking it." He looked at Mara. "We break it. Whoever put it here knows someone was snooping." "We don't break it. We learn nothing." Callan made his decision quickly. He smashed the lock with a rock, and the sound echoed across the empty depot like a gunshot. They both froze, listening. Nothing stirred. Inside, the warehouse was dark and smelled of grain and chemicals. Callan lit the small lantern they'd brought, keeping the flame low. The light revealed stacks of feed sacks, crates marked with shipping labels, and in the back corner a desk covered in papers. Mara headed straight for the desk, while Callan examined the feed sacks. She rifled through bills of lading, delivery receipts, correspondence. Most of it was mundane business records, but then she found a ledger. "Callan, look at this." He came over. The ledger detailed purchases and sales, but the names were coded. Ranch locations described by geographic markers instead of owners. But the pattern was clear. The same buyer acquiring property after property, all through a company called High Valley Holdings. "That's Hale's company," Callan said. "I've seen the name before." Mara flipped pages. "Look at the dates. These sales all happen within weeks of reported problems. Fire here, poisoned cattle here, well contamination here. It's all circumstantial. Unless..." Mara pulled out a stack of letters wedged between the ledger and the desk edge. She unfolded the first one and her breath caught. It was from Dorothy Pritchard, written in her distinctive, elegant script, addressed to Vernon Hale. The letter detailed plans for encouraging specific ranchers to sell, mentioned using local influence to create persuasive circumstances, suggested that the Mercer property would be particularly valuable for future rail expansion. "She's not just working with him," Mara said. "She's orchestrating the whole thing." Callan read over her shoulder, his expression growing darker with each line. "This is it. This is proof. We need to take these, show them to people, make them..." The warehouse door slammed open. 3 men stood silhouetted in the moonlight, all carrying rifles. The one in front was tall, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. Vernon Hale. "Well," he said pleasantly, "this is unfortunate." Callan moved in front of Mara instinctively. "We're just leaving." "I don't think so." Hale stepped inside, his men flanking him. "You're holding documents that belong to me. I'd like them back. These documents prove you've been destroying ranchers to steal their land." Such harsh language. I prefer to think of it as aggressive acquisition. Hale's smile didn't reach his eyes. And it's all perfectly legal. I purchase properties at fair market value. Not my fault if those properties experience difficulties that lower said value. You're poisoning cattle, burning buildings. Can you prove I personally did any of those things? I'm a businessman, Mr. Mercer. I deal in contracts and sales. What happens to influence those sales? Well, that's just unfortunate coincidence. Mara's hand tightened on the letters. Dorothy Pritchard's letters prove otherwise. Do they? Hale's expression didn't change. Or do they prove that a well-meaning community member was concerned about struggling neighbors and reached out for advice on how to help them transition to more sustainable livelihoods? That's not what these say. It's what my lawyers will say, they say. And my lawyers are significantly more expensive than yours. Hale held out his hand. The documents, please. No. Callan's voice was flat. The 3 rifles came up simultaneously, all pointed at Callan's chest. I'm trying to be reasonable, Hale said. You're trespassing on my property, stealing my documents. I would be well within my rights to have my men shoot you and claim self-defense. But I'm a civilized man, so I'm giving you a choice. Hand over the papers and leave, or refuse and face the consequences. Mara felt Callan's muscles tense, saw him calculating odds that weren't in their favor. 3 armed men against 1 rifle Callan couldn't reach without getting shot. Do what he says, she whispered. Mara, please. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Callan slowly pulled the letters from Mara's hands and held them out. Hale took them without coming closer, letting one of his men collect them. Smart choice. Now I'm going to give you both some advice, free of charge. Go home. Forget you were ever here. Sell me your ranch for a fair price while you still can. And if we don't, then the unfortunate circumstances affecting your property will continue and escalate. Hale's voice went cold. I've bought 23 ranches in this territory, Mr. Mercer. 23 families who thought they could resist. Every single one of them eventually sold. You won't be any different. You killed our cattle. I did nothing, but cattle do die on struggling ranches, along with horses. Sometimes even people, if they're careless around barn fires or well collapses. Hale stepped back toward the door. The valley's changing. You can change with it, or you can be crushed by it. Your choice. He left with his men, taking the letters and ledger. The warehouse door swung shut, leaving Callan and Mara alone in the dimness. Callan punched the wall hard enough to split his knuckles. Damn it! We're alive. We had proof. We had everything we needed, and He punched the wall again. Callan, stop. Mara grabbed his arm. You did the right thing. Those men would have killed us. Now we have nothing. Nothing except his threat and no way to prove what he's doing. We know the truth. That's something. Truth doesn't matter if nobody believes it. Callan pulled away, pacing. Hale was right. His lawyers will twist those letters into something innocent. Dorothy will claim she was just being helpful, and we'll be the crazy ranchers making wild accusations. Mara's mind raced. Hale had the physical evidence, but evidence wasn't just paper. The feed sacks, did you see what was in them? Grain looked like. Why? Were they marked? Labeled? Callan frowned, thinking back. Yeah, they had a supplier name, Midwest Feed and Supply. That's the same company our poisoned grain came from, the grain that killed your cattle. Mara grabbed his shoulders. Don't you see? Hale's using the depot to store contaminated feed. He probably has people planted at ranches he wants to destroy. If we can prove the feed here is poisoned, how? We can't get back in here. Hale will have guards posted now. Then we don't need the feed from here. We need the feed that's already at ranches, other ranches that have been hit. Mara's words came faster. If we can collect samples from multiple properties, show they all came from the same contaminated source, trace it back to Hale's company, that's a lot of ifs. It's more than we had 5 minutes ago. Callan looked at her, something like hope flickering behind the anger. You really think this could work? I think it's our only chance. They rode back to the ranch as dawn broke across the hills. Tom Fletcher was waiting in the yard, rifle across his knees, his face creased with worry. You're late, he said. Was about to come looking. We ran into complications. Callan dismounted stiffly. But we found what we needed, or we found where it used to be anyway. Hale caught us, Mara added. Took the evidence we'd collected, letters from Dorothy detailing their arrangement. Tom's expression darkened. That's bad. But we have a new plan. Callan explained about the contaminated feed, the theory about Hale storing it at the depot and planting it at targeted ranches. Tom listened carefully, then nodded slowly. Morrison Ranch lost 6 head last month, said it was bad feed but couldn't prove it, and the Hendersons had a similar problem back in the fall. Do they still have samples of the feed? Might. Most ranchers keep evidence when something kills their stock, case they need to make claims with suppliers. Tom stood. I can ask around quiet-like. See who's willing to share samples for testing. Hale threatened us, Mara warned. Anyone who helps us becomes a target. Let him try. I'm too mean to scare and too stubborn to quit. Tom headed for his horse. Give me 3 days. I'll see what I can find. He left as the children emerged from the house, sleepy and confused about why their father and Mara had been gone all night. Callan invented a story about checking on distant fencing. The kids didn't quite believe it, but they also didn't push. That afternoon, while Callan slept off the exhaustion of the night's events, Mara found herself alone in the kitchen with her thoughts. They'd come so close, had actual proof in their hands, and lost it. But something Tom said stuck with her. Ranchers kept evidence. They documented losses, saved samples, recorded details. Because frontier life was brutal and uncertain, and proof mattered when you needed to justify expenses or make insurance claims. Mara pulled out paper and a pencil and started making a list. Every ranch she knew of that had experienced mysterious problems in the past year. The dates. The types of damage. She cross-referenced it with what she'd seen in Hale's ledger before he took it. The pattern was there. Clear as day for anyone willing to look. The question was whether anyone would. 3 days later, Tom returned with news and packages. Got samples from 4 different ranches, he said, setting cloth-wrapped bundles on the table. Morrison, Henderson, the Clayton Place, and Old Bill Warren's spread. All of them lost cattle to poisoned feed in the last 6 months. Mara unwrapped the first bundle. The grain inside looked normal, smelled normal. But she'd learned from the incident with Emma's berries that poison didn't always announce itself. We need to get these tested, Callan said. Real testing, by someone who knows what they're looking for. I know a veterinarian 2 territories over, Tom offered. Good man, honest, doesn't owe the Pritchard family anything. How long for results? Week, maybe 2. Callan looked at the grain samples, at Tom's weathered face, at Mara standing beside him. And what do we do in the meantime? We survive, Mara said, echoing his earlier words, and we prepare for war, because that's what this was becoming. Not a disagreement between neighbors or a personal grudge, but an actual war for the valley itself. Hale wanted land, and he was willing to destroy anyone who stood in his way. Dorothy provided local intelligence and influence. Together they were a machine designed to crush resistance, unless someone finally stood up and fought back. That someone, apparently, was going to have to be them. The samples went to the veterinarian. Days stretched into a week. During that time, nothing happened. No more dead cattle. No mysterious fires, just eerie, oppressive quiet. They're waiting, Callan said one evening, seeing if we'll sell. Will you? No. The answer was immediate, unequivocal. This is my land. My father built this ranch from nothing. Caroline and I raised our children here. I'm not giving it to some wealthy bastard who thinks money entitles him to other people's lives. Even if fighting means losing everything? Even then. Callan looked at her. What about you? You could still leave. Get clear before this gets worse. Mara had asked herself that question 100 times. The smart choice was obvious. Pack her bag, take the next wagon out, find work somewhere far from Vernon Hale and Dorothy Pritchard and this whole mess. But when she tried to imagine leaving, all she saw was Sam's face when he asked her to promise she'd come back. Emma's careful smile when Mara braided her hair each morning. Jesse's stubborn determination to protect his family. Callan's rough honesty, his willingness to fight for what mattered. I'm not leaving, she said. Why not? Because they don't get to win. Mara met his eyes. People like Hale and Dorothy, they win by making everyone too scared or too tired to resist. They count on folks like me running rather than fighting. But I'm done running, Callan. I'm done being someone who doesn't matter enough to stand and defend something. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment Dorothy decided I wasn't good enough to exist in her valley. The moment Hale threatened to kill us if we didn't hand over evidence. The moment... She stopped, swallowed hard. The moment I started caring about whether this family survives. Callan was quiet for a long time. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. Just held it, his palm warm and calloused against hers. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For staying, for giving a damn, for being too stubborn to know when you're beaten. I learned from the best." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Yeah, well, we make a good pair of stubborn fools, I guess." The moment stretched between them, heavy with things neither would say. Then Callan released her hand and stood. "I should check the fence line before dark. I'll keep dinner warm." He left. Mara sat alone in the kitchen, her hand still tingling where he'd held it, and wondered when exactly this job had stopped being temporary. When had this house stopped being just a place she worked? When had these people stopped being just her employers and become something infinitely more dangerous? Family. The word terrified her, because family meant roots, meant staying, meant trusting that something good could last instead of being ripped away the moment you let yourself believe in it. But sitting in that kitchen with evening light slanting through the windows and the sound of children playing upstairs and the knowledge that Callan would come back for dinner because this was his home and somehow, impossibly, it was starting to feel like hers too. Mara let herself want it, just for a moment, just long enough to remember what hope tasted like. The veterinarian's report arrived 12 days after Tom sent the samples. Callan tore open the envelope with shaking hands while Tom and Mara watched. His face went pale as he read. "What does it say?" Tom asked. "Arsenic. All 4 samples contained arsenic mixed into the grain, enough to kill cattle slowly, make it look like disease rather than poisoning." Callan's hands clenched on the paper. "It's all here. Chemical analysis, source identification, everything. This is proof." "Proof of poisoning," Mara said carefully. "But not proof that Hale did it. The grain all came from Midwest Feed and Supply. That's Hale's distributor, which he'll say means nothing. Lots of ranchers buy from that supplier. Someone else could have contaminated the grain after purchase." Tom shook his head. "She's right, Callan. This proves the feed was poisoned, but connecting it directly to Hale is another matter." "So what do we do?" "We go public," Mara said. "We take this report to every rancher in the valley. Show them they're all targets. Show them that standing together is their only chance. Half of them are too scared of Hale to breathe wrong. Then we convince them that being scared won't save them, that he'll take their land whether they cooperate or not." Mara's voice strengthened. "We turn this from one family's problem into the valley's problem." Callan looked at Tom. "What do you think?" "I think she's right. Hale's been picking us off one at a time. Time we stood together and made him pick a fight with all of us at once. Or we paint targets on everyone's backs. Maybe." Tom's expression was grim. "But seems to me those targets are already there. We've just been pretending not to see them." Callan studied the veterinarian's report one more time. Then he made his decision. "All right, we do this. But we do it smart. Quiet meetings, trusted people only. No sense warning Hale we're organizing until we're ready to move." Over the next week, word spread through carefully controlled channels. Tom talked to neighbors he trusted. Those neighbors talked to others. Slowly, quietly, a network formed. Some ranchers refused to participate. Too scared, too dependent on Pritchard family business, too convinced that cooperation with Hale was safer than resistance. But others listened. Families who'd lost cattle, who'd watched their barns burn, who'd seen neighbors forced to sell and wondered when their turn would come. The meeting was set for a Sunday afternoon at Jack Brennan's ranch, far enough from town that curious eyes wouldn't notice. Mara spent the morning before the meeting teaching Emma how to make biscuits. It was easier than thinking about everything that could go wrong. Emma worked the dough seriously, her small hands pressing and folding like Mara had shown her. "Why are you and Pa going to Mr. Brennan's ranch?" Emma asked. "Just a meeting, honey. Boring adult business. About the bad people trying to take our home?" Mara's hands stilled. "What makes you think that?" "I'm not stupid. I hear things." Emma looked up, her expression far too knowing for 10 years old. "Mrs. Pritchard wants to hurt us because you hit her, and there's a mean man helping her. Jesse told me." "Jesse talks too much." "Jesse's scared, so am I." Emma's voice wavered. "Are we going to lose the ranch? Are you going to leave?" Mara knelt down to Emma's level. I'm not leaving. Not unless your father throws me out personally, and we're fighting to keep this ranch. That's what the meeting's about. Getting help from neighbors. Will they help? I hope so. But you're not sure. No, honey, I'm not sure about anything except that we're going to try our hardest. Emma was quiet for a moment, then threw flour-dusted arms around Mara's neck. I'm glad you stayed, even if everything's scary now. Mara held her tight, breathing in the smell of flour and childhood and trust she didn't deserve but desperately wanted to earn. Me too, she whispered. Me too. The meeting at Jack Brennan's ranch drew 17 families. Not everyone Callan had hoped for, but more than Mara expected. They gathered in Jack's barn, standing in awkward clusters, speaking in low voices. Callan stood at the front with Tom beside him. Mara stayed near the back, trying to be invisible. This was Rancher's business. She was just the housekeeper who'd started it all. But when Callan began explaining about Hale's operation, about Dorothy's involvement, about the poison feed and systematic destruction of valley ranches, people started looking at Mara, some with blame, some with curiosity, some with a respect she hadn't expected. We have proof, Callan said, holding up the veterinarian's report. 4 different ranches, 4 separate samples, all contaminated with the same arsenic-laced grain, all purchased from Hale's distributor. This isn't bad luck. It's deliberate sabotage. That doesn't prove Hale did it, someone called out. No, it proves the pattern. And combined with the ranch sales, the timing, Dorothy Pritchard's involvement, it's enough to make people ask questions. What good are questions if we can't prove answers? Questions make Hale nervous, Tom interjected. Makes buyers think twice about purchasing land from him. Makes his operation less profitable. An older woman Mara didn't recognize spoke up. Even if we prove Hale's been poisoning cattle, he's got lawyers and money. He'll find a way out of it. Unless we don't let him, Mara heard herself say. Everyone turned to look at her. She felt her face flush but forced herself to continue. Hale's power comes from being hidden, from making each ranch think they're alone in this. But if we go public together, if we take this to newspapers, to territorial authorities, if we make enough noise that he can't silence all of us, she took a breath. Then maybe we have a chance. You're the one started this whole mess, a man near the front said. Not unkindly, just stating fact. You and that temper of yours with Dorothy. You're right, I did. Mara stepped forward. But Dorothy and Hale were destroying ranches long before I arrived. I just gave them a more visible target, made them show their hand faster than they wanted. And now we're all targets, another voice added. You were always targets, Callan said firmly. Mara just helped you see it. The argument continued for another hour. Some families committed to standing together. Others remained uncertain. A few left entirely, unwilling to risk Hale's wrath. By the end, they had 11 families willing to fight. 11 families against Vernon Hale's money and Dorothy Pritchard's influence. It felt simultaneously like everything and nothing. On the ride home, Callan was quiet. Mara gave him space until they were nearly back to the ranch, then asked, Are you discouraged? Yes and no. He shifted in the saddle. 11 families isn't an army, but it's 11 more than I had yesterday, and maybe that's enough. Enough for what? To survive what comes next. What came next arrived with the dawn. Mara woke to screaming. She ran from her room, heart pounding, and found Callan and all 3 children standing in the yard staring at the barn. Every animal was dead. The horses, the milk cow, the chickens. All of them lying in the snow, eyes glazed, foam crusting their mouths, poisoned. Every single one. Emma was crying. Sam stood frozen in shock. Jessie's face was white with barely controlled rage. And Callan looked like something inside him had finally broken. Mara walked to his side, her boots crunching in snow stained with animal death. Callan? He didn't respond, just stared at the carnage. We need to protect the children. Get them inside. They did this. His voice was hollow. Killed defenseless animals to send a message. I know. I should have sold, should have taken Hale's offer when I had the chance. Don't! Mara grabbed his arm. Don't let them win by breaking you. They already won, Mara. Look around. Everything's dead. We're not dead, and as long as we're alive, we can fight. Callan finally looked at her, his eyes empty of the fire that usually burned there. With what? They've taken everything, Jesse's voice cut through the morning air. No, they haven't. They all turned. The boy stood straight-backed, his jaw set in a perfect mirror of his father's stubbornness. They haven't taken us, Jesse said. They haven't taken our land. They haven't taken Miss Mara. He walked over and stood between his father and Mara. And they haven't made us quit yet. Something flickered in Callan's expression, a spark catching on dry kindling. Your son's right, Mara said quietly. They want us beaten, want us to walk away, but we don't have to give them what they want. Callan looked at his children, at Jesse's determination, at Emma's tear-stained courage, at Sam trying so hard to be brave. Then he looked at Mara, at this woman who'd walked into his broken life and refused to leave even when leaving made perfect sense. All right, he said finally, we fight. How? Jesse asked. Callan's expression hardened into something cold and resolved. We make Hale's war public, force him into the open where everyone can see what he's done. He'll deny it. Probably. But we'll have 11 families standing with us. 11 properties worth of dead animals and poisoned feed and mysterious fires. That's a pattern even expensive lawyers can't completely explain away. Mara felt hope kindle in her chest despite the death surrounding them. When? The Red Hollow cattle auction is in 3 weeks. Biggest gathering of ranchers and buyers in the territory. Everyone who matters will be there. Callan's voice grew stronger. We make our stand there. Public. Loud. Impossible to ignore. Hale will be there too. I'm counting on it. They spent the rest of that terrible morning burying dead animals and comforting traumatized children, and planning a confrontation that would either save the valley or destroy them completely. There was no middle ground anymore. Just war. The 3 weeks before the Red Hollow auction passed in a blur of preparation and paranoia. Callan rode to each of the 11 allied ranches, coordinating stories, collecting evidence, making sure everyone understood the risk they were taking. Some families wavered when the reality sank in. 2 pulled out completely, too frightened to stand against Hale publicly, but the remaining 9 held firm, bound together by shared losses and mounting rage. Tom Fletcher became their unofficial general, organizing the logistics with military precision. Jack Brennan offered his ranch as a safe meeting place, far enough from prying eyes. And Mary Fletcher, Tom's wife, quietly spread word among the Valley women, building a network of support that existed beneath the men's official planning. Mara found herself in an odd position. She wasn't a rancher, didn't own property or cattle or have any official standing. But the families kept seeking her out anyway, asking questions, requesting advice, treating her like she belonged to the leadership somehow. Why do they keep asking me things? She said to Callan one evening. I'm nobody. You're the woman who started this whole fight. Callan was cleaning his rifle, methodical and focused. That makes you somebody whether you like it or not. I just hit Dorothy Pritchard. You did a lot more than that. You refused to disappear when she told you to, stood up when everyone else was too scared or too polite. He looked at her. People respect that. People think I'm reckless. Maybe. But reckless is starting to look a lot like brave out here. The children adapted to the tension in their own ways. Jesse threw himself into ranch work, trying to compensate for the lost animals by doing twice the labor himself. Emma went quiet again, retreating into books and silence. And Sam started having nightmares, waking up screaming about fires and dead horses. Mara spent most nights sitting by Sam's bedside, holding his hand until he fell back asleep. The boy was too young for this kind of fear, too small to carry the weight of adult violence and corruption. But the frontier didn't care about fairness. It crushed the vulnerable alongside the strong. Will they hurt us? Sam asked one night, his voice tiny in the darkness. Not if I can help it. But what if you can't help it? What if they're too strong? Mara smoothed his hair back from his feverish forehead. Then we'll be strong together, all of us. Your pa, me, Jesse, Emma, Tom and Mary and Jack. Everyone who's fighting alongside us. That's a lot of people. It is. And we're fighting for something that matters, for homes and families and the right to live without being afraid all the time. Sam was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm still scared, though. Me too, honey. Me too. 10 days before the auction, Dorothy Pritchard made one final attempt to end things her way. She arrived at the ranch in a fancy carriage, accompanied by her husband Richard and a well-dressed man Mara didn't recognize. Callan met them in the yard, his rifle prominently displayed across his arms. Mrs. Pritchard, Wasn't expecting company. Dorothy's smile was cold and sharp. I thought it was time we had a civilized conversation. May we come inside? No. Callan, be reasonable. I'm being perfectly reasonable. You're not welcome in my house. Richard Pritchard stepped forward, a portly man with nervous eyes. Now see here, Mercer. My wife came to offer you a final opportunity. To sell my land to Vernon Hale? Callan's voice was ice. Tell him I'd rather burn it to the ground myself. The well-dressed stranger spoke for the first time. Mr. Mercer, I'm Lawrence Hammond, legal counsel for High Valley Holdings. My client has authorized me to offer you double the original purchase price for your property. That's extremely generous considering current market conditions. Current market conditions. Callan laughed bitterly. You mean the conditions your client created by poisoning my cattle and killing my livestock? I'm sure I don't know what you're referring to. No? Then maybe you should ask Mrs. Pritchard here about the letters she wrote to Hale detailing exactly how to destroy Valley ranchers. Dorothy's expression didn't change. I have no idea what you're talking about, and making slanderous accusations won't help your situation. My situation? Callan stepped closer. My situation is that everything I own has been systematically destroyed by your criminal operation, and I'm done pretending otherwise. Hammond pulled out a document. Mr. Mercer, I strongly advise you to reconsider. My client is prepared to be generous now, but if you continue this antagonistic path, I cannot guarantee that generosity will remain available. Is that a threat? It's a reality. Frontier life is dangerous. Accidents happen. It would be unfortunate if those accidents were to escalate beyond property damage. Mara stepped out onto the porch, unable to stay silent any longer. You just threatened his life, in front of witnesses. Hammond looked at her like she was an insect. I threatened nothing. I merely observed that ranching involves inherent risks. Risks you've been manufacturing. Again, I have no knowledge of what you're implying. Hammond turned back to Callan. You have until the Red Hollow auction to accept this offer. After that, the terms will change significantly. I'm not selling. Then you're a fool. Dorothy spoke softly, but her words cut like knives. You're going to lose everything, Callan. Your land, your livelihood, possibly your children when the authorities decide you're an unfit father living in poverty. All because you chose to listen to a woman who doesn't belong here instead of people who actually have your best interests at heart. My best interests, Callan's voice shook with rage. You burned my hay storage, poisoned my animals, made my children terrified in their own home. And you dare talk about my best interests? I've done nothing but try to help this community transition to a more prosperous future. By destroying it. By making room for progress. Dorothy gathered her skirts. The offer stands until the auction. After that, you're on your own. And Mr. Mercer, when you're standing in the ruins of everything you refuse to protect, remember that I gave you a choice. They left in a swirl of expensive fabric and veiled threats. Callan stood in the yard long after the carriage disappeared, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white. They're not going to stop, Mara said quietly. I know. Even if we expose them at the auction, they'll keep fighting. I know that too. Callan finally looked at her. Are you having second thoughts? Every day. Every hour. Mara wrapped her arms around herself. But then I think about Sam's nightmares and Emma's silence and Jesse trying so hard to be the man of the house at 10 years old, and I remember why we're doing this. For them. For all of us. For every family in this valley who's too scared to fight alone. She met his eyes. We don't have to win, Callan. We just have to make enough noise that someone finally pays attention. And if no one does, then at least we tried. At least we stood up instead of rolling over. Callan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Caroline would have liked you. The comment caught Mara off guard. Why do you say that? Because she believed in fighting for things that mattered. Didn't care what people thought as long as she knew she was right. His voice went rough. She died fighting a fever she should have survived. Refused to give up even when the doctor said it was hopeless. Made me promise to take care of the kids, to keep the ranch, to not let grief destroy everything we built. You kept that promise. Barely. If you hadn't shown up when you did... He stopped. I was going to give up. Was maybe 2 weeks away from just walking away from everything and letting the valley have it. But you didn't. Because you wouldn't let me. Wouldn't let the kids starve or the house fall apart or any of us just surrender to the grief. Callan looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. So yeah, Caroline would have liked you, and she would have told me I was an idiot if I let you leave. Callan, I know this isn't the time. I know we've got Hale and Dorothy and a whole damn war to deal with first, but I needed you to know. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, the gesture gentle and devastating. You matter, Mara. To the kids. To this ranch. To me. Mara couldn't speak. Couldn't process the weight of those words or the way they settled into the hollow spaces she'd spent years keeping empty. So she just nodded and turned away before he could see the tears threatening to fall. Because mattering meant staying, and staying meant trusting that this time, finally, someone wouldn't take it all away. The week before the auction brought unexpected developments. Tom Fletcher arrived at the ranch with a newspaper from a town 2 territories over. The headline made Mara's heart stop. Territorial investigation into land fraud allegations. Someone talked, Tom said, spreading the paper on the kitchen table. Someone with enough influence that the territorial governor's office is sending investigators to Red Hollow. Callan read the article quickly. It doesn't mention Hale by name. No, but it mentions High Valley holdings and suspicious patterns of property acquisition in frontier regions. That's Hale's company. Who would have reported this? Mara asked. Could have been anyone. Could have been one of the ranchers Hale destroyed who had connections elsewhere. Could have been a buyer who got suspicious about the deals Hale was offering. Tom leaned back. Point is, we're not alone anymore. The territorial government is paying attention. Which means Hale is going to be desperate, Callan said. Cornered animals are the most dangerous kind. He was right. 2 days before the auction, riders appeared at 3 of the allied ranches simultaneously. Masked men who delivered simple messages: withdraw from the protest or face consequences. At the Morrison Ranch, they shot the family dog as a demonstration. At the Hendersons, they burned a storage shed. At the Warrens, they left a note pinned to the door with a knife that read, "Next time, it won't be property." One family pulled out immediately. 2 others wavered but held firm after Tom and Callan made emergency visits, bolstering their courage with presents and promises of protection. We need to get the children out of here, Mara said that night. All of them. Every ranch family's kids should be somewhere safe until this is over. Callan nodded slowly. Mary Fletcher's been saying the same thing. She's offered to take them to her sister's place about 30 miles south, out of Hale's immediate reach. When? Tomorrow morning, before anyone realizes what we're doing. Telling the children was harder than Mara expected. Emma cried silently, clinging to Mara's skirt. Sam didn't understand why he had to leave. And Jesse outright refused. I'm not abandoning you, he said stubbornly. I can help. I can fight. You can help by keeping your brother and sister safe, Callan said firmly. That's the most important job, Jesse, protecting them while I handle this. But no buts. You're the man of the family when I'm not there. That means sometimes you do the hard thing even when you want to do something else. Jesse's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. I don't want you to die. I'm not going to die? You don't know that? No. But I know I'm going to fight like hell to come home to you. Callan pulled his son into a fierce hug. Be brave, Jesse. Be strong. Take care of your brother and sister, and trust that I'm doing everything I can to make this right. They left at dawn. Mara stood in the yard watching the wagon carry the 3 children away and felt like something was being torn out of her chest. Sam waved until they disappeared over the ridge. Emma's small face was pressed against Mary's shoulder, and Jesse sat rigid and furious, his jaw set against everything he couldn't control. They'll be safe, Callan said beside her. Will they? Safer than here. That's all we can manage right now. The house felt desperately empty without them. Too quiet. Too still. Mara cooked dinner for just 2 people, and the portions looked wrong on the plates. I hate this, she said. Which part? All of it. The fear, the violence, sending children away from their own home because grown men can't settle disputes without destruction. Callan pushed food around his plate. You want to know what I hate most? What? That I brought you into this. That you're in danger because I was too stubborn to sell when I should have. You brought me into nothing. I chose to stay. You stayed because I wanted to, Mara interrupted. Because for the first time in my life, I found a place that felt like it might actually need me. Not just tolerate me or use me temporarily, but actually need me. She set down her fork. So don't you dare apologize for that, Callan Mercer. Don't you dare make my choice into your burden. He looked at her across the table, something raw and complicated in his expression. You're going to Red Hollow with me. Obviously. It's going to be dangerous. I know. Hale's men will be there. Dorothy will be there. The whole thing could turn violent. I know that too. And you're still coming. Try to stop me. Callan almost smiled. Wouldn't dream of it. They spent the evening preparing. Callan cleaned weapons he hoped they wouldn't need. Mara packed documents and evidence in a leather satchel. They worked in comfortable silence, two people who'd learned to exist in each other's space without requiring constant conversation. Around midnight, Callan spoke. If something happens to me tomorrow, nothing's going to happen. Mara, listen. If something happens, there's paperwork in the desk upstairs. Legal documents giving you partial ownership of the ranch. I had them drawn up last week. She froze. What? You heard me. If I die, you inherit half of everything. The other half goes to the kids when they're old enough, but you're named as trustee until then. Callan, you can't. Already done. Signed and witnessed. He looked at her steadily. You've earned it, Mara. Everything you've done for this family, for this place, you've earned the right to call it yours. I don't want your ranch. I want you alive. Then we'll both get what we want. But if things go wrong, I needed you to know. He crossed the kitchen and took her hands. You're not temporary anymore. You're not just the housekeeper. You're family. And you deserve to be protected the same way I'd protect Caroline's memory or the kids' future. Mara's throat was too tight to speak. She'd spent 34 years being disposable, being the one who got left behind or cast aside when something better came along. And here was this stubborn, broken man offering her permanence, offering her a home. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me yet. We still have to survive tomorrow. We will. You sound certain. I have to be. The alternative's unthinkable. Callan pulled her into his arms then, just held her while the clock ticked toward dawn, and the future neither of them could predict. Mara let herself lean into his strength, memorized the steadiness of his heartbeat, believed for just a moment that things might actually work out. They left for Red Hollow before sunrise. The journey took most of the day, and they met the other ranch families at predetermined points along the way. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, they were a convoy of 9 wagons, carrying 18 adults who decided that fighting together beat dying alone. The auction grounds were chaos. Hundreds of ranchers and buyers crowded the pens, examining cattle, negotiating deals, conducting the business that kept the frontier economy moving. Temporary corrals stretched across acres of land. A massive tent served as the main auction house, where the serious bidding would happen. And everywhere, armed men. Some were legitimate ranch hands protecting valuable livestock. Others were clearly something else. Mara noticed them watching the crowd with predator's eyes, their hands never far from their weapons. Hale's men, Tom muttered. He's got security everywhere. Expected that, Callan said. We stick to the plan. Wait until the main auction starts and everyone's gathered in the tent. Then we make our accusations public where the maximum number of witnesses can hear. And if Hale tries to shut us up, then we make sure enough people hear the truth before he can. They separated into the crowd, trying not to draw attention. Mara stayed close to Callan, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must hear it. The leather satchel containing their evidence felt impossibly heavy. The afternoon auction began with standard proceedings. Cattle lots, breeding stock, equipment sales. Mara watched Vernon Hale hold court near the front, surrounded by well-dressed associates and local officials he'd clearly bought. He was older than she expected, maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Dorothy Pritchard sat in the second row, her posture perfect, her expression serene. She looked like someone attending a pleasant social event, not someone about to be accused of conspiracy and fraud. Callan waited until the auctioneer finished a large cattle sale. The crowd's attention focused forward. Then he stood. "I'd like to address the assembly," he called out. The auctioneer looked annoyed. "This isn't a town meeting, sir. If you want to bid..." "I'm not here to bid. I'm here to report a crime." Silence rippled through the tent. Hundreds of faces turned toward Callan. Mara saw Hale's expression shift from bored politeness to sharp attention. "Mr. Mercer, this is highly inappropriate," the auctioneer started. "What's inappropriate is systematic land fraud and criminal sabotage," Callan interrupted. "And I have proof." He held up the veterinarian's report. Tom Fletcher stood on the other side of the tent, holding up similar documents. Other allied ranchers rose throughout the crowd, each holding evidence. "My name is Callan Mercer from Gray Bend Valley. Over the past year, my ranch has experienced poisoned cattle, arson, and deliberate destruction of property. I'm not alone. 8 other families here today have suffered identical attacks. All of us have one thing in common. We own land that Vernon Hale wants to buy." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Hale stood slowly, his face a mask of calm concern. "Mr. Mercer, I understand you've experienced difficulties, but accusing me of—" "I'm not accusing, I'm stating facts." Callan's voice carried across the tent. "Arsenic-poisoned grain traced back to your supply distributor. Systematic targeting of ranches and areas you want to develop. Coordination with local influencers to isolate and intimidate holdouts." Dorothy remained seated, but Mara saw her hands clench in her lap. Hale's lawyer, Hammond, stood. "These are slanderous lies. My client has conducted all business dealings legally and ethically." "Then explain this," Tom Fletcher called out, holding up feed samples. 4 ranches, 4 identical poisonings, all from grain supplied by Midwest Feed and Supply, your company's exclusive distributor. "Coincidence," Hammond said. "Many ranches use that supplier." "And do many ranches also experience barn fires, livestock deaths, and mysterious accidents right before you make purchase offers?" Another rancher stood. "Because that's what happened to me, and my neighbor, and half the families in this valley." More ranchers were standing now. People who hadn't been part of the original plan but recognized their own experiences in the accusations being made. The audience was shifting from curious to hostile. "This is absurd," Hale said, his voice rising. "I'm a legitimate businessman being attacked by failures who can't accept their own incompetence." "Then explain the letters," Mara heard herself say. Every eye turned to her. She stood on shaking legs, clutching the satchel. Letters written by Dorothy Pritchard to Vernon Hale detailing plans to encourage ranchers to sell through persuasive circumstances. Letters describing which families to target and what methods to use. Mara's voice strengthened. "We found them at your abandoned depot, along with stockpiles of contaminated grain." "You have no such letters," Dorothy said, standing finally. "You're making desperate accusations based on nothing." "We had them," Callan said, "until Hale's men caught us at the depot and took them back at gunpoint." Hale laughed. "So you admit you have no actual evidence of these fictional letters? Just your word against mine?" "We have the depot location," Tom said. "We have witnesses who can confirm what was stored there. Trespassers' testimony, worthless in any legal proceeding." The momentum was slipping. Mara felt it like sand through her fingers. They had truth, but no proof. Accusations, but no concrete evidence. Hale was too good at this, too practiced at denying the undeniable. Then a voice cut through the tent from the back. "I have the proof." Everyone turned. A man stepped forward, middle-aged and weathered, carrying a leather case. Mara didn't recognize him, but clearly others did. Whispers spread through the crowd. "That's Judge Morrison from the Territorial Court," someone said. The man walked to the front of the tent and set his case on the auctioneer's podium. "My name is William Morrison. 2 weeks ago, I received an anonymous package containing copies of correspondence between Mrs. Dorothy Pritchard and Mr. Vernon Hale detailing a conspiracy to defraud property owners through illegal means. The package also included financial records showing payments from Hale's company to individuals for services rendered, services that correlate directly with incidents of sabotage at specific ranches." Hale's face went white. "Those documents are forgeries. They've been authenticated by 3 separate handwriting experts," Morrison continued calmly. "I've spent the past week investigating these claims. I've also interviewed 4 men who were paid by Hale's organization to commit acts of sabotage. 3 of them have agreed to testify in exchange for leniency." The tent exploded in noise, ranchers shouting questions, Hale's associates backing away from him. Dorothy Pritchard sitting frozen, her perfect composure finally cracking. "This is outrageous," Hammond shouted. "My client demands—" "Your client is under investigation by the Territorial Governor's Office," Morrison said, "as is Mrs. Pritchard. I'm here today to formally notify Mr. Hale that all property transactions conducted by High Valley Holdings in the past 18 months are being reviewed for fraud. Any rancher who sold land under duress has the right to file for transaction reversal. Chaos. Complete, absolute chaos. Mara felt Callan's hand find hers in the crowd. She squeezed back, hardly believing what was happening. Hale tried to leave. 2 territorial marshals appeared and blocked his exit. Dorothy attempted to slip away and found her path similarly blocked. Hammond was demanding lawyers and making threats that nobody was listening to anymore. And in the middle of it all, Callan turned to Mara and said, "We did it." How? The letters were taken. Someone made copies. Someone who had access to the depot before we did. Callan looked toward Jack Brennan, who stood at the edge of the tent with a small smile on his weathered face. Someone who knew exactly what Hale was doing and waited for the right moment to expose it. Jack caught Callan's eye and tipped his hat, then disappeared into the crowd. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of statements and questions and territorial officials taking control. Mara and Callan gave testimony along with the other ranch families. The evidence was collected, documented, made official. By evening, Vernon Hale and Dorothy Pritchard were in custody. Hammond was under investigation for conspiracy. And the Valley families were finally safe. They rode home together, the convoy of wagons moving through darkness lit by stars and hope. Mara leaned against Callan's shoulder, exhausted and relieved and still half convinced she'd wake up to find it had all been a dream. "What happens now?" she asked. "Investigation? Trials, probably. Restitution for families who lost property." Callan's arm tightened around her. "And we rebuild, get new livestock, repair what was damaged, figure out how to live without looking over our shoulders constantly." "Sounds complicated." "Probably will be." He looked down at her. "But we'll manage. We're pretty good at complicated." "Are we?" "We survived Hale and Dorothy. I figure that qualifies us for just about anything." Mara smiled despite her exhaustion. "What about the children? When can they come home?" "Tom's wife is bringing them back tomorrow. They'll be home before you know it." Home. The word still felt strange and wonderful and terrifying, but Mara let herself hold it, believe it, trust that this time it might actually be real. They reached the ranch near midnight. The house looked small and dark and perfect. Callan helped Mara down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For staying, for fighting, for being too stubborn to give up even when giving up made perfect sense. Someone had to keep you honest." "Yeah." He smiled, real and unguarded. "Someone did." They stood in the yard under the stars, 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage of grief and fear, and discovered something worth protecting, something worth risking everything to keep. And when Callan kissed her, gentle and questioning and full of promise, Mara kissed him back and felt like she'd finally come home. Not to a place, to a person, to a family, to a future she'd stopped believing was possible. The valley would heal, the ranch would rebuild, and Mara Quinn, the woman nobody wanted, would finally learn what it meant to be chosen. Morning came too fast and not fast enough. Mara woke in her narrow cot with sunlight streaming through the window and the memory of Callan's kiss still warm on her lips. For a moment, she lay there wondering if exhaustion had conjured the whole thing. But then she heard him moving around the kitchen, the familiar sounds of coffee brewing and firewood being stacked, and she knew it had been real. Everything had been real. She dressed quickly, her hands fumbling with buttons, her reflection in the small mirror showing a woman she barely recognized. Same worn features, same plain face, but something had changed in her eyes, something that looked dangerously close to happiness. Callan was at the stove when she entered the kitchen. He looked up, and the expression on his face made her heart stutter. "Morning," he said. "Morning." They stared at each other like awkward teenagers until Callan cleared his throat and gestured to the coffee pot. "Made extra. Figured we'd both need it after yesterday." "Thank you." Mara poured herself a cup and sat at the table, trying to find normalcy in a morning that felt anything but. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they'd said and hadn't said the night before. Finally, Callan spoke. "About last night. If you're about to apologize, don't." "I wasn't going to apologize. I was going to ask if you regretted it." Mara met his eyes across the kitchen. No. Do you? No. He set down his spatula and crossed to where she sat. But I need to know what you're thinking, where your head's at, because I meant what I said before. You're not temporary to me anymore, Mara. And if last night meant something different to you than it did to me, it didn't. The words came out rushed, honest. Mean something different, I mean. It meant... She stopped, struggling to articulate feelings she'd spent years refusing to acknowledge. It meant I want to stay. Really stay. Not as the housekeeper or the hired help or someone passing through, as someone who belongs here. Callan's expression softened. You already belong here. Do I? Because I've belonged places before, Callan, or thought I did. And every single time something happened to remind me I was just temporary, just filling space until something better came along. I'm not asking you to fill space. I'm asking you to share it. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. Look, I'm not good at this. Caroline was the one who knew how to talk about feelings and make things sound right. Me, I just blurt out whatever I'm thinking and hope it doesn't sound like complete nonsense. You're doing fine. Am I? Because what I'm trying to say is that I care about you, not just because you saved my kids or kept this ranch running or stood up to Dorothy Pritchard. I care about you because you're stubborn and honest, and you don't let anyone, including me, get away with self-pity or giving up. He took her hand. And I want you to stay because you want to stay. Not because you think you owe me something or because you're scared to leave, but because this place, this family, feels like home. Mara's throat was too tight to speak. She'd imagined conversations like this before, in the lonely hours of other jobs in other towns. Imagined someone finally saying the words that would make her feel chosen instead of tolerated. But imagination was nothing compared to the reality of Callan's rough hand holding hers and his eyes looking at her like she mattered. It does feel like home, she managed. That's what scares me, because I've never had a home that lasted. Then maybe it's time you did. The sound of wagon wheels interrupted whatever Mara might have said next. They both stood, and through the window saw Mary Fletcher's wagon cresting the ridge, 3 small figures visible in the back. The children, Mara breathed. She ran outside without thinking, Callan right behind her. The wagon had barely stopped before Sam launched himself out, running toward them with arms outstretched. Miss Mara! Pa! Mara caught him, nearly stumbling under the impact, and felt his small body shake with relief. Emma climbed down more carefully, then ran too, wrapping her arms around Mara's waist. And Jessie, trying to maintain dignity, walked over and then broke into a run at the last second, crashing into his father's arms. You're okay, Jessie said, his voice muffled against Callan's chest. You're really okay. Told you I would be. You said you'd try. That's not the same thing. Callan pulled back and looked at his son. You're right, it's not. But I'm here. We're all here. And it's over, Jessie. The fighting, the fear, all of it. We won. Actually won? Or just survived? Both. Hale and Dorothy are in custody. The territorial government's investigating, and every family in the valley is safe. Jessie's eyes widened. Really? Really? The boy's careful composure finally cracked. He started crying, great heaving sobs that he'd clearly been holding back for weeks. Callan held him, while Emma and Sam clustered close, their own tears flowing freely. Mary Fletcher climbed down from the wagon, her expression soft. They were brave, all 3 of them, but they've been worried sick. Thank you for keeping them safe, Mara said. Of course. Though I have to say, Miss Quinn, you've caused quite a stir in the valley. Everyone's talking about the housekeeper who helped bring down Vernon Hale. It wasn't just me. Maybe not. But you were part of it. And people remember that. Mary glanced at Callan, then back at Mara with a knowing smile. People also talk about other things. About how Callan Mercer looks at his housekeeper. About how she looks back. Mara felt her face flush. Mrs. Fletcher, Mary. And don't worry, dear. After everything you've been through, I think you've earned the right to a little happiness. Both of you. She climbed back onto the wagon. I'll leave you to your reunion, but Mara, when things settle down, come visit. The ladies who supported you would like to properly welcome you to the valley. She left with a wave, and Mara turned back to find all 3 children staring at her with varying degrees of curiosity and hope. Are you staying forever now? Sam asked. Mara looked at Callan, who just smiled and waited for her to answer. Yes, I'm staying. Forever, forever? Or just until something bad happens again? Forever, forever? Emma's face lit up. Does that mean you'll be our new mother? The question landed like a stone in still water. Mara froze, unsure how to navigate this particular minefield, but Callan stepped in smoothly. It means Miss Mara is part of our family now. What exactly that looks like, we'll figure out together. All of us. But nobody's trying to replace your mother, Emma. She'll always be your mother. I know that. Emma looked at Mara seriously. But Mama's gone, and you're here, and I think... She stopped, struggling for words. I think maybe it's okay to have both. To remember Mama and also have Miss Mara. Jessie nodded slowly. I think Mama would want that. Would want us to be happy again. She would, Callan agreed. She definitely would. Sam, oblivious to the emotional complexity, just grabbed Mara's hand. Come on, I want to show you the rabbits Mrs. Fletcher had at her sister's place. They were so soft, and one of them was brown, and... He dragged her toward the house, still chattering. Emma and Jessie followed, and Mara found herself swept up in the chaos of homecoming and children's excitement and the overwhelming normalcy of it all. Later, after the children had been fed and were playing in the yard, Mara found herself alone with Callan in the barn. He was examining the empty stalls where horses and cattle should have been, his expression grim. Going to take time to rebuild the herd, he said. Money, too. Even with the territorial investigation, I don't know how much restitution we'll actually see. We'll manage. Will we? I've got savings, but not enough to replace everything we lost. And with winter coming, he stopped. I'm thinking about taking out another loan. Tom knows a banker in the next territory who might be willing to work with us. How much do you need? Callan named a figure that made Mara's stomach drop. It was substantial, the kind of debt that could bury a struggling ranch. What if I could help? She said quietly. Mara, you don't have that kind of money. Not me personally, but I know someone who might. She took a breath. Before I came here, I worked for a wealthy family in St. Louis. The wife died, and she left me something in her will. Not much in their world, but in ours. How much? Mara named a figure slightly smaller than what Callan needed for the livestock. His eyes went wide. You've had that money this whole time? Yes. And you've been living in a closet off my kitchen, working yourself to exhaustion, taking abuse from the town, because the money wasn't for me. It was emergency funds, something to fall back on if everything went wrong and I had nowhere else to go. She stepped closer. But I don't need emergency funds anymore, Callan. I need a home, and if using that money helps secure this home, then that's what it's for. I can't take your savings. You're not taking anything. I'm investing in the ranch. In this family, in us. Mara held his gaze. You gave me partial ownership yesterday, so this is me acting like an owner, using my resources to protect what's mine. Callan stared at her for a long moment, then he pulled her into his arms and just held her, his face pressed against her hair. I don't deserve you, he said roughly. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. He laughed, the sound shaky with emotion. Yeah, I guess I am. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Nothing about rebuilding ever was. Mara's money combined with a small loan bought new cattle and horses. The barn needed repairs. The house needed maintenance that had been deferred too long. And the children needed time to adjust to the new reality of safety after months of fear. Emma had nightmares about barn fires. Sam became clingy, afraid to let Mara or Callan out of his sight. Jessie took on too much responsibility, trying to compensate for feeling helpless during the crisis. But slowly, steadily, the ranch came back to life. Tom Fletcher and Jack Brennan helped rebuild the burned hay storage, refusing payment beyond meals and beer. Mary Fletcher organized the Valley women to help with preserving food for winter, and one by one, families who'd stood with them at the auction stopped by to offer labor, supplies, friendship. The Valley itself was transforming too. Hale's investigation uncovered property fraud across 3 territories. Dozens of families filed claims to recover land sold under duress. Dorothy Pritchard, facing multiple criminal charges, agreed to testify against Hale in exchange for a lighter sentence. Her husband quietly divorced her and moved east, taking their assets and leaving her with nothing. Some people felt sorry for her. Mara wasn't one of them. She made her choices, she told Callan one evening. She chose greed over community, power over integrity, and now she's facing the consequences. You don't feel any sympathy? Even a little? I feel sympathy for the families she destroyed. The children who went hungry because their parents lost everything. The ranchers who gave up and left because they couldn't fight anymore. Mara set down the shirt she was mending. Dorothy had every advantage. Money, influence, education. She could have used those things to help people. Instead, she used them to hurt people. So no, I don't feel sympathy. Fair enough. Callan was quiet for a moment. The trial starts next month. Territorial prosecutor wants us to testify. All of us? Everyone who was targeted. Could be dozens of families on the stand. He looked at her. You ready for that? Ready to stand in front of a courtroom and tell the truth about what happened? Mara considered. Yeah, I think I am. The trial took place in early November in the territorial capital. Mara had never been to a city that large, with its wide streets and brick buildings and sense of permanence that frontier towns never quite achieved. The courthouse was intimidating. High ceilings, polished wood, men in expensive suits who looked at the frontier families like they were curiosities from another world. But when Mara took the stand and the prosecutor asked her to describe the events that led to the investigation, she found her voice steady. She told them about arriving at the Mercer ranch, about Dorothy's harassment, about the poisoned cattle and burned hay and dead animals left as messages, about finding evidence at the depot and having it taken at gunpoint, about the fear and the fighting and the choice to stand up instead of running away. Hale's lawyer tried to discredit her, suggested she was a scorned woman making false accusations, implied she'd manipulated Callan for financial gain, called her testimony unreliable because she was emotionally invested in the outcome. The prosecutor destroyed those arguments methodically, pointed out that Mara's testimony was corroborated by dozens of witnesses, that her personal investment didn't make her dishonest, that attacking her character didn't change the facts. And when Dorothy Pritchard took the stand and tried to claim she'd been manipulated by Hale, that she'd never intended to hurt anyone, that she was as much a victim as anyone, the prosecutor produced her letters, her handwriting, her specific instructions for targeting families. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Vernon Hale was found guilty of fraud, conspiracy, criminal sabotage, and attempted murder related to the poisoned feed. He was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison and ordered to pay full restitution to every family affected. Dorothy Pritchard was found guilty of conspiracy and fraud. She received 10 years with possibility of parole after 5, contingent on continued cooperation with ongoing investigations. When the verdicts were read, Mara felt Callan's hand find hers. On her other side, Tom Fletcher let out a breath he'd been holding. Around them, Valley families wept with relief. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been fought for, earned, won by people who refused to be invisible. They returned to Gray Bend heroes. The town that had once whispered about Mara now treated her with wary respect. The general store owner apologized for his previous coldness. Women who'd avoided her started inviting her to social gatherings. Even the children in town treated Emma, Jessie, and Sam with a new kind of deference. "They're acting like we're famous," Jessie said, bemused. "You kind of are," Mara told him. "You're the family that stood up to the bad guys and won. That's the kind of story people remember." "Do you like being famous?" "Not particularly, but I like knowing we made a difference." Winter settled over the valley, and for the first time in years it felt peaceful rather than threatening. The Mercer ranch was still recovering financially, but the new cattle were healthy and the horses strong. The house was warm, the children were happy, and Mara had stopped waiting for everything to fall apart. On Christmas Eve, Callan gathered the family in the front room. A small tree stood in the corner, decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments the children had made. Presents wrapped in brown paper sat beneath it, nothing expensive but all chosen with care. "Before we open gifts," Callan said, "I have something to say." The children settled expectantly. Mara sat on the sofa, hands folded, wondering what was coming. Callan pulled a small box from his pocket and crossed to where Mara sat. Then, to her absolute shock, he got down on one knee. "Callan, let me get this out before I lose my nerve." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band. "This was my grandmother's ring. My grandfather gave it to her when they homesteaded this land 60 years ago. It's been passed down through the family, and I'd like to give it to you, if you'll have it, if you'll have me." Emma gasped. Sam started bouncing excitedly. Jessie just smiled. Mara stared at the ring, at Callan's hopeful face, at the children watching with barely contained joy. "You want to marry me?" she said, needing to hear herself say the words. "Yeah, I do." "Why?" "Because I love you, because the kids love you, because this ranch feels like a home instead of a graveyard when you're in it. Because you're stubborn and brave and you make me want to be better than I am." He took her hand. "Because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." "I'm not easy," Mara warned. "I'm difficult and opinionated, and I'll argue with you about everything." "I know. That's one of the things I love about you. And I'm scared. Terrified, actually, because every time I've let myself care about something, it's been taken away." "I'm scared too. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." Mara looked at this man who'd been broken when she met him, who'd fought his way back to living, who'd stood beside her against impossible odds, and never once suggested she should be anything other than exactly who she was. She looked at Emma, who was crying happy tears, at Sam, who could barely contain himself, at Jessie, who nodded encouragement. She looked at the home they'd built together, the family they'd become, the future that somehow, impossibly, looked bright instead of terrifying. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Callan slipped the ring onto her finger, and then the children were piling on top of them, laughing and crying and celebrating. Somewhere in the chaos, Callan kissed her and Mara kissed him back, and everything felt exactly right. They married in the spring in a small ceremony at the ranch with the Valley families who'd fought beside them bearing witness. Mara wore a dress Mary Fletcher helped her sew, simple but beautiful. Emma and Sam scattered wildflowers. Jesse stood beside his father as best man, proud and serious. Tom Fletcher officiated, his voice carrying across the ranch yard as he spoke about courage and family and love that survived the worst the frontier could throw at it. When Callan said, "I do," his voice was steady. When Mara said, "I do," she believed it. The reception lasted until sunset, neighbors bringing food and music and joy. Mara danced with Callan, with the children, with Tom and Jack, and every ally who'd helped them survive. At one point, she found herself standing at the edge of the celebration, watching the happy chaos, and Mary Fletcher appeared beside her. "How does it feel?" Mary asked. "Strange. Good. Overwhelming." Mara touched the ring on her finger. "Like I'm waiting for something to go wrong. That feeling will pass. Eventually you'll stop waiting for disaster and start trusting in permanence." "Did you? Stop waiting?" "Eventually. Took about 5 years of marriage before I stopped waking up every morning surprised that Tom hadn't left in the night." Mary smiled. "But he never did leave, and Callan won't either. That man looks at you like you're the reason the sun rises." "He looks at me like I'm difficult." "Same thing in my experience." Mara laughed, surprising herself. A year ago she'd been alone, unwanted, convinced she'd spend her life moving from job to job without ever finding a place to belong. And now here she was, married to a good man, mother to 3 children who needed her, part of a community that had fought alongside her. "Thank you," she told Mary, "for being kind when others weren't. Thank you for showing us all what real courage looks like." Mary squeezed her hand. "You reminded this valley that we're stronger together than apart, that standing up matters. That's a gift, Mara." The evening wore on, the celebration gradually winding down as families headed home. The children fell asleep exhausted, and Callan carried them one by one to their beds. Finally, it was just Mara and Callan alone in the quiet house. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, testing the name. "Still sounds strange." "You'll get used to it." He pulled her close. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for asking. Even though you're terrified? Especially because I'm terrified. Because being willing to be scared means I finally have something worth losing." She looked up at him. "And I think maybe that's what courage really is. Not the absence of fear, but loving something enough to risk the fear." "When did you get so wise?" "Must have picked it up from a stubborn rancher I know." Callan kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And Mara let herself believe in it. Believe in him. Believe in the home they'd built and the family they'd created and the future they'd fought so hard to protect. The years that followed weren't perfect. Nothing ever was. The ranch struggled through a brutal winter 2 years after the wedding. They lost cattle to disease and had to rebuild again. Jesse went through a rebellious phase at 15, testing boundaries and challenging authority. Emma developed a stubborn independence that reminded everyone of Mara herself. Sam remained sweet but struggled in school, needing extra patience and help. Mara and Callan fought sometimes. About money, about parenting, about whose turn it was to deal with the leaking barn roof. They weren't a fairy tale. They were real people with real flaws navigating real life. But they navigated it together. When Jesse turned 18 and announced he wanted to go to agricultural college to learn modern ranching techniques, Mara fought her instinct to keep him close and helped him apply. When Emma decided at 16 that she wanted to be a teacher and needed books Mara couldn't afford, Callan sold his best horse to buy them. When Sam struggled with reading and the town teacher suggested he was slow, Mara spent hours every evening teaching him herself until he caught up with his peers. The ranch grew. Not into an empire like Hale's had been, but into something sustainable and good. They hired hands during busy seasons. They invested in better breeding stock. They built a name for quality cattle and honest dealing. The valley grew too. New families settled in the homesteads abandoned during Hale's campaign. A railroad spur was built, bringing commerce and connection. Gray Bend transformed from a suspicious frontier town into a real community. And Mara transformed too. The woman who'd arrived at the Mercer ranch expecting to stay 2 months at most became the woman the valley turned to when problems needed solving. She served on the school board, organized community barn raisings, became the person people sought out when they needed honest advice or a stubborn ally. She was no longer invisible, no longer temporary, no longer the woman nobody wanted. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Callan woke her before dawn and led her outside. They sat on the porch watching the sun rise over land that was theirs, truly theirs, paid for in full and thriving. "What are you thinking?" Callan asked. "That I almost left. That first day when Dorothy threatened me, when things got hard, I almost packed my bag and ran like I always had before." "What stopped you?" "Sam asking me to promise I'd come back. Emma trusting me with her hair. Jesse looking at me like I mattered." She leaned against his shoulder. "You, standing in this yard and choosing to fight instead of surrender. Best decision I ever made." "Fighting?" "Keeping you." He kissed the top of her head. "Everything good in my life since that day, it's because you stayed. Everything good in my life is because you let me." They sat in comfortable silence as the valley woke around them. Cattle lowing in the distance, birds singing in the trees. Somewhere inside, the children stirring, not children anymore, nearly grown, but always children to them. Mara thought about the journey that brought her here, all the towns she'd left, all the jobs she'd lost, all the times she'd been told she wasn't good enough, young enough, pretty enough to matter. She thought about what she'd tell that younger version of herself, the woman stepping off the wagon into Callan's hostile stare and a valley's judgment. She'd tell her to hold on, to fight, to believe that somewhere ahead waited a home worth every scar earned finding it. She'd tell her that being unwanted by the wrong people was a blessing in disguise. That real belonging wasn't about fitting into someone else's expectations, but finding people who valued you exactly as you were. She'd tell her that courage wasn't fearlessness. It was loving, despite fear. Staying despite doubt. Building despite knowing that life could destroy everything without warning. Most importantly, she'd tell her that she was enough, had always been enough, would always be enough. Not because someone finally chose her, though that mattered, but because she'd chosen herself, chosen to stand up, chosen to matter, chosen to fight for a place in a world that tried to make her invisible. "I love you," Mara said to Callan. "I love you too. Even though I'm difficult, especially because you're difficult." The sun cleared the horizon, painting everything gold. In the distance, the barn Callan had rebuilt stood strong against the morning light. Smoke curled from the chimney of the house Mara had transformed from broken to whole. Cattle grazed in pastures they'd fought to keep. It wasn't perfect, wasn't without struggle, but it was theirs. And for a woman who'd spent 34 years believing she'd never have anything worth keeping, that was more than enough. That was everything. The frontier woman nobody wanted had become the heart of the valley itself. The temporary housekeeper had become the permanent foundation. The woman who'd arrived with nothing but a suitcase and survival skills had built a legacy that would outlast them all. Not through wealth or power or conquest, but through stubborn refusal to disappear. Through choosing love over fear. Through proving that sometimes the most radical act is simply staying when everyone expects you to leave. Mara Quinn Mercer had found her home, and she never let it go.